Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
The loneliness of being alone together. That's what people often say about marriages that don't work out. Our union with Andrew was a little different. He was much older than me and married late. What surprised everyone around him? Because he was remarkably good-looking. I noticed it many times later. When we appeared together in a crowded place, women often turned to look at Andrew. Where else would you meet a man who looks exactly like the macho man on the cover of a book? Why did he marry me? I couldn't even explain it to myself. The mirror never flattered me. Not to the point where I thought I made a decent match for Andrew. Besides, a hard life doesn't make anyone pretty. And I've had a very hard life since I was a young girl. I was orphaned very young. In the car accident that killed my parents, I was the only survivor. I avoided the orphanage. My aunt took custody of me. She moved in with me and took care of me diligently all the years until I came of age. There was never any intimacy between us, but I can't reproach her for neglecting her duties. I was always fed, cleanly dressed. I had everything I needed for my studies. My aunt made sure I did my homework. She went to parent-teacher conferences and bought me birthday presents. And when I turned 18, I got a surprise. It turns out that my aunt was saving money, a pension, which I was getting from my parents. "Doria, I want to have a serious talk with you," she said. "Let's use this money to buy you a nice room, and you'll sign over the apartment to me." After all, it's such hard work taking care of someone else's child for years. And I got a penny from the state for it. If I was a little more experienced, I'd ask. As they say, you can guess where I would have sent the aunt in response to such a proposal. But at 18, I was still a child and obediently signed all the necessary documents. A room. My aunt really picked a nice one for me. In a 2-room apartment, the neighbors are a decent family, a mother with an adult daughter. We established a good relationship right away. My room was bigger than theirs. Spacious, bright, with a neighbor's balcony. When they did the laundry, they asked permission to hang the laundry there. And in return, they regularly treated me to all sorts of goodies, from homemade pies to homemade cake. A year later in the spring, walking in the park, I met Andrew. There was some sort of outdoor dance, and he asked me to slow dance. I was just passing by and had no intention of joining the dancing couples, but it was impossible to refuse Andrew. He courted me so gallantly and proposed so quickly that before I knew it, I was married. Andrew insisted that we sell my room and his apartment and buy a new place. A nice steel one in the center of town. We put the apartment in Andrew's name. He said it would make the paperwork easier. I was not at all sophisticated in these matters and just trusted him. Our difficulties started soon after the wedding. It was very modest, a few girlfriends on my side, and one single friend on my husband's side. About his parents, Andrew said that they lived far away, and there was no need for them to travel across the country to sit in a restaurant. So there was no one to tell me about the man I married. As it turned out, Andrew was passionate about children. It was his thing. Before, I thought that all those ladies' novels about cool bosses going crazy with excitement at the thought of having an heir, all those novels were nonsense. But it turns out Andrew would do anything to have a son. It's hard to convey his disappointment when he found out I'd failed to get pregnant in the first few months of marriage. He insisted that I quit my job and get treatment. By that time, I had already finished my courses and was working in a flower store. I liked the job very much, and I didn't want to leave it. But I did it for my husband's sake. After a thorough examination in a private medical center, it turned out that I didn't need any treatment. There was nothing wrong. And then I found out that my husband in the past suffered from a severe form of drug addiction, passed a very serious rehabilitation, and the problem of our inactivity undoubtedly in him. For several weeks, he didn't speak to me. Again, had I been more experienced and more confident, maybe I would have taken a very different tone with my husband. But he became for me the second person after my aunt, who had some responsibility for me and who cared about my fate. At night, I cried quietly, asking myself how long it would last and how it would end. And the end of it all was that crazy evening when Andrew came home out of the blue with a man I had seen in person at the wedding. I knew he was Andrew's buddy. His name is Kevin, and he's like a doctor. Now I see it in a different light. He probably treated my husband when he was on drugs. I set the table, emptied the refrigerator almost completely, and ate. When I saw the amount of alcohol, some kind of holiday, something to celebrate, I asked. In its own way, muttered my husband. I had never drunk strong drinks before that evening. All my acquaintance with alcohol was limited to champagne and occasionally a couple of glasses of semi-sweet wine. Andrew did the sleath thing. If he'd given me cognac, I would have killed and refused. But he made a cocktail, orange juice, ice. In short, I didn't even realize I was drunk for the first time in my life. But the men were pretty drunk too. That's when Andrew dragged me into the bedroom, saying, "Maybe you'll get a kick out of it." And a minute later, he sent Kevin in there. I did not remember the night well, but I remembered the deadly resentment I felt towards my husband, the desire to take revenge on him, and the drunkenness, feeling a sense of permissiveness. I woke up late with a heavy head and realized that I was home all alone. The men had already left. Andrew and I didn't speak for a few more days, steeled by remorse. I decided to pretend that everything that had happened simply hadn't happened. After all, almost everyone has some crazy things happen in their lives. And then Kevin called me. To say that my cheeks swelled would be an understatement, although the call was strictly business. "Daria, you're not working right now, are you?" he asked, after what we had. He also spoke in first name, so, as I decided to pretend it never happened. "I don't know if your husband told you. I'm the head physician at a private nursing home, and we're in dire need of staff. The job is simple, taking care of old people. The pay is good. It would seem that there should be enough applicants. But we have to turn down a lot of applicants. People come in who are irresponsible, drunk. Today they're out, and tomorrow I can't count on them. It would seem impossible for my cheeks to burn hotter. But it happened. Would you like to try it?" asked Kevin. With great joy I answered. The first time I was so nervous that I poured myself half a shot of valerian before work. And then to repel the smell, I used poison mint gum. In our nursing home, there are 2 floors. On the first floor are placed the fastest old people. They walk either on their own, or with a stick, or even with skates, but they walk. And for this we love them sincerely. The old people live 2 by 2 in each ward. They have a toilet and a shower, and they go to the canteen themselves. Of course, not everything is so smooth. There are some nasty grandparents, like Wendy for example, who will always be unhappy. Cleaning is a problem for her. One minute she's sleepy and my cleaning is in the way. "Turn off the vacuum cleaner," she shouts pitifully. She won't let me open the window. Even in the heat of summer, she is drafty and cold. The food in the canteen is unpalatable. No entertainment. She perceives any visitor as a person who is ready to listen to her endless complaints about life. The only person who could put her in her place is our Dr. Kevin. She realizes that her life depends on him to some extent, and she listens to him as God. She'd be willing to complain to him about her illnesses nonstop. It's a shot here and a sting there. In short, my paws are aching and my tail is falling off. But Kevin stopped that from the start. The more you talk about illnesses, the more you prepare the ground for them to develop. Depression starts to set in, which undermines the body. And in that case, you can die simply from a runny nose. Right now, there are 2 people against your illnesses, you and me. But if you take their side and force me to fight them alone, well, then he spread his hands. Wendy often nodded, looking at him obsequiously in the eyes. "And to strengthen your body, I prescribe you to drink a shot every day like a mountain and snack on a sandwich with red caviar." Kevin knew that this patient had the means to eat Roman apples. Otherwise, he wouldn't have ordered such a thing. The family would have paid more if Wendy hadn't sent them a homely atmosphere. I was the one who didn't come in right away. But then, after talking to another nurse, Vanessa, experienced caregiver, came to the same conclusion, where Vanessa only did not work and in public hospitals, and at home for the sick cared for. And she said to me, "Sure, it's nice here. Everything is clean, beautiful, comfortable, like in a sanatorium. But on the other hand, these old people feed us. We're in their service. So no matter how they behave, we have to politely, with a smile, God forbid, raise our voice or tell the same tick in the eye who it is. It's easier in a regular hospital where you can yell. She thought about it and added, if it hurt, of course. But Grandma Maria, we all just adore. And it would not have been fated to be an ordinary village grandmother. But her son made it big. Now he has his own big company. Grandma Maria, talking about her son, always says the words big, big, big boss. And his house is big, and his car is big, and his dacha is huge. Purely Rural House of Culture asked Grandma Maria not to live in his village house. Why cockroaches, at least in winter, daughter-in-law did not allow. Her daughter-in-law doesn't like her. Though and tried to behave Grandma Maria quieter than water below the grass, but still some orders daughter-in-law violated. There were too many to remember. Her son persuaded her to move here to the village. And in winter, you can't even drive on those roads. And you mom will be well fed, and a doctor nearby, and women of the same age. You'll have someone to talk to. And I'll come often. He really did come, brought his mother what she always called hotels all in a row, and a beautiful French robe in front of you. She immediately put it away in her closet, in her coffin bag. Repeated that in the coffin will lie beautiful as a bride in this luxury and overseas fruit, which Grandma Maria has never tried and taste. She was afraid only green. Maybe not ripe, and a huge box of chocolates. She herself wanted something simpler. I've often observed that old people return to their childhood dreams and want to fulfill them. And I myself heard her asking her son Jack, "Don't buy me expensive things. Bring me something embarrassing to say. Bring me a can of green peas and a can of runny milk." I dreamed as a girl that someday I'd open a can and eat it all with a big spoon. Our family, remember, was always limited. You share with your brothers and sisters. What's in it for you? 2 peas and a drop of that condensed milk. Grandma Maria lived without a roommate. Her son had paid for a separate room for her, and her room was like a hospital room or even a sanatorium ward. What about in a hut? In the corner with a small lamp, Grandma Maria understood all her responsibility for carelessness with fire. Yes, in their village with wooden houses, everyone was terribly afraid of fire. And she only lit the light bulb on Easter or Christmas Eve for an hour. While she sang the word of prayer, she had her own TV set too. No need to go to the common living room. But Grandma Maria didn't like TV. She was always angry that they were broadcasting scary extra programs. All apologized while listening, but the radio was much better. She left her favorite Kalina Red channel, on which one after another transmitted songs, took out a plastic box. Back in the year 70s, when white, now yellow absorbent cotton put on big glasses with thick panes and delved into needlework. How much higher than that? And there was more than a few things tied up in her room. That was what gave it a resemblance to the village, for it was covered with once sown cornflowers and poppies, bound with science. Dushkin pillows embroidered and crocheted, curtains, towels, tablecloths, napkins. The room was blooming. Grandma Maria did not forget us either. I had a blue shawl as a keepsake, tied by her hands. Vanessa had everything, including Lucy the dishwasher. Grandma Maria had a memento of some kind. And for Kevin, she knitted a beautifully knitted reindeer sweater and convinced him that he could sleep in the snow like that. If we had any committees, Nina, the headmistress, would try to get the guests into the room. Grandma Maria, and here we have a real museum of Russian culture, she said. The guests were amazed. And there were some good grandfathers, too. We had Chuck and William. The first one also came from the village. I went through the war, and not like now. A lot of people call themselves veterans, but they barely smelled gunpowder themselves. No, he was a machine gunner. Women usually live longer. They don't. Chuck buried his wife and daughter. That's not wasted. There's a hug left in him. Which one of us kids never complained about anything? He was happy with everything. The most upsetting thing was that he was rapidly losing his eyesight, almost couldn't read. But he always came. Whatever evenings we organized in the living room, even children from the kindergarten would come to perform poems and dances in front of the old people. A local poet would drop by to read poetry. Someone who lives here will come in to read a book aloud. Chuck, in the first rows of listeners, will be his neighbor William. Though he resembled him in appearance, also light, thin, also saw everything worse. But from Chuck differed a very intelligent man who studied to be an engineer with a red diploma. He got his main education in the camps. During the years of repressions, he could tell very interesting, and for hours about those with whom he sat in prisons, met in exile. He slept side by side on the camp bunks. But the same cruel life accustomed him to trust no one. And his family didn't work out. He also very much wanted to stay in this world, to live a little longer. And he was always afraid that he was about to die. Any pain in his heart he perceived as a precursor of a heart attack in his head, as a precursor of a stroke. Then it seemed to him that his heart stopped. Then his hands possessed several times a day. He was getting on the scale. Wasn't he losing weight? Wasn't gnawing. Was there a secretly evil tumor in him? Kevin used to check in on him several times a day, just to reassure him. Worse, if a panic attack hit our old man. Ambulances weren't very willing to come to our house at night. Sometimes she was delayed for an hour or two, and we called her often. After all, the second floor was filled with our lying old people. We had more of them. Many relatives were simply tormented, ready to pay any money, just to return to the former way of life, not to jump up to the patient at night, not to be tied to his regime. It really takes skill. At one time I thought I'd never make it. The patients are different. Some are light as a feather, some are heavy. Alas, they can't lift. Vanessa showed me how to lift such an old man, to wash him, to change his underwear. And there are so many little things. To take care of one at home can make your head spin. And if you have a dozen of them, and how many of them need to be spoon-fed? It's not quick. The second thing is to persuade them that everything is tasty, that they need to eat. Vanessa said that when she worked in a regular hospital, there were 50 people per hospital. So another nurse would just put a plate on the patient's chest and go, and do as you wish with a spoon, like a dog. There are many more such old people here cared for. And the face in a complex combination. A smile and a clutch of teeth. Almost all grandparents from well-to-do families. But the strength is simply not left to their loved ones. Here Helen, if we did not have it, her daughter, would have to part with her husband to 1,000 gimmicks at the old lady. I do many manipulations just on automatic to put on a gray, similar kerchief, fluff, chick rings, open the window, and immediately correct any curtain so that you do not feel a draft. Daria, I need to cut my nails today and my feet are good too. And with the sulfur, they're all cold and lifeless. So at least blood will be shed from the bleachers to grease my nails and feet. Massage with cream. I start gently, rubbing. Old people's bodies are fragile, so it doesn't hurt. It won't leave a bruise. I can't feel it. Helen is angry. Daria is stronger. When the massage ends, it turns out that the tea is already quite cold, and it is necessary to hurry to the kitchen for a new portion of porridge. Helen, with a shudder, refuses it with unleavened food. Nauseated, she asks for a sandwich. As always, I linger longest in her room. But that's okay. There's only Grandma Miranda left. Well, I mean, she's still all touched up and doesn't realize where she is at all. Thinks she's on a train. Nina didn't even want to take her. Golden Autumn doesn't specialize in the mentally ill. But Miranda turned out to be an unusually quiet creature. And I feel sorry for her son, or rather, the whole family. They don't have much money. Both husband and wife work. And Miranda is afraid to leave home. She thinks she's on a train. The decision was made when Miranda, in the absence of home, climbed through the window on the third floor, explaining the noise to passers-by. The full conductor locked the compartment. And now it's my station to go to. One of the strange men managed to run into the entrance, kicked the door to the apartment with his shoulder. Luckily, it wasn't iron. Dragged my grandmother back in. What else could she have done with my aunt's words? I don't know. She closes the bathroom door behind her and can't open it. She starts screaming and calling for help. Then she goes out into the stairwell and asks every cross-dresser she meets, "Is the train coming soon or is she late?" Pity, Loved ones risked it, took it. And so far, nothing extraordinary has happened. True, Miranda drinks tea only from a glass with a subcup. And my daughter needs to get a firm grip on the handle. Or as the carriage shakes, as grandmother pours steep boiling water from the hospital to go and go. Well, you can put up with that. And when Miranda asks where we're going now and if the end of the road is coming soon, she's always content to say, "You remember, don't you, Miranda? It's a big country, so we've got a long way to go." Kevin prescribed her some pills, after which Miranda decided to fit more into life and take advantage of all the outings. And in the keys to me and my daughter. Road radio. And then you and I will go to the restaurant in the car. Anyway, just as he prescribed the pills, he canceled them. As soon as I served all my pets and was about to go already to the dining room to drink tea with pies. What pies with apples and cinnamon gave today for breakfast? The smell made me dizzy. I was anticipating drinking tea like a second orderly. Vanessa opened Miranda's door and shouted at me, "Daria," and us called downstairs. "We'll be meeting the new grandmother." New B, why both of us? Oh, wait, the one for whom the suite is for. Vanessa nodded. Our boarding house took over a building that used to belong to a daycare center. And the big playroom on the first floor, with its south-facing windows, has been turned into a suite. The suite was empty most of the time. It was too expensive for mere mortals to afford. And the suite was, of course, a single room. I can imagine, Vanessa whispered. And the ass and dough will probably have to be wiped with fluff. She bored us. Down we went, wary and interested extremely. We didn't have to wait long. A quarter of an hour, maybe, a car pulled up. A nice color. Better not ask the make. I can tell the difference between a car and a bus at best. I've never owned a car. A young man got out, opened the back door, and offered his hand to the woman, looking at the companion he was leading down the driveway. Vanessa and I soaped the granny. Her tongue didn't turn to call her that. Small in stature, graceful, gray-haired in a light-colored cloak. She walked lightly, and her shoes had heels too. I think I underestimated the scale. Vanessa stretched out. She's not just torturing us, she's outliving us. I looked at Vanessa. She is big, formidable badly. I couldn't even find a robe in the right size for her, and Vanessa is wearing a colored robe, increasing her resemblance to an Asian woman. She has black hair knotted at the back of her head, thick black eyebrows. It's a good thing we're on a shift together. Vanessa can be summoned without a problem. To help lift the heaviest patients. She helps them out like bears. On the other shift, there are two nurses of about the same build, both elderly. It's harder for them, if anything. Vanessa came to us through an ad posted in the church. She's very religious, and when she enters the rooms where the old ladies have icons, she crosses herself. Vanessa likes almost everything, except the most harmful, but even those trust her more than me, for example, or the girls from the other shift. Can't imagine the mighty Vanessa dropping anyone. Oh, how did we get the groupies away from her? It was our shift change. The night nurse came in on her night shift. Vanessa and I had just gone downstairs to get dressed. Some light jumps up the stairs and shouts in a proper voice that her grandmother is dead. Nina didn't even give her a hard time afterwards. But then we were really confused. What to do? Vanessa just kept her cool. I called Nina and Kevin. Did they leave already? Called for a special car. That's when it all started. There's this dead guy and a driver no better. They took one look at the dead man and said, "Carry him downstairs." Carry the man down, dear us. What are we to you? Who are we to you? How can we carry her? How can we lift her? It turns out that one man is post-op. The other is just shaking his head, saying, "I can't lift it." It's worse than dragging the grand piano up 16 floors without an elevator. Vanessa spits on her palms and says, "But we'll all do it." And right there on the blanket, a man is dragging by one end and pulling by the other. We grab. Vanessa's panting. That's how we carried the body down. I remember that blizzard, flakes of snow in the face, the subway, slippery, icy paths, which for some reason we fell on every now and then. It was a shorter song. The next day, we found out that the relatives were big fans of a newspaper like Ichie. They demanded a pathologist. In vain, Kevin assured them he could write their aunt's diagnosis with his eyes closed. Where was it? Or maybe she had died from not being treated. It was said with frothing at the mouth. Kevin just waved his hand. And this firm will probably have to hang a teaspoon and a half of sugar in cups with a silver spoon. Vanessa whispered doomedly. No, you tell me, why did she come here? I shrugged. No relatives who sent their loved ones to the Golden Fall. I could understand. I couldn't understand her wanting to move in with us. She walked under the arm of her grandson so briskly that she looked more like a member of some high-ranking committee called to find out if everything was in order, if, for example, the fire extinguisher was in place, and whether the all-important paperwork was properly drawn up and signed. At the open door to the suite stood Nina herself as a doorman. Seeing us, she waved that you come over. Quickly, we obediently approached. The suite, naturally, shone with cleanliness. She was sitting in a chair under a palm tree, and a young man of very pleasant appearance stood beside her. Anna, across from your room is our living room. You can always sit there, talk to someone. We have very friendly residents, piano, record player, library, walks, activities twice a week. Dinner's coming up. If you want a special menu, maybe you could order food from the restaurant? We do have that option. We bring it in. To be honest, we brought a cake for Semyon Grigorievich's anniversary once, when he was 90 years old. Mole nodded her head, but with a kind of unmistakable dignity. It didn't even need to be emphasized, it lived in her. Anton, can you leave quietly? She turned to the young man. See, you're leaving me with nothing. No, absolutely not. In a hurry, Nina, our girls, Vanessa and Daria. Girls, come, at any time you can call. They will do everything you need and read, and take you for a walk. In general, they will do everything. Almost silently, Vanessa said, Will you also give me a bell? As soon as the madam calls, we'll be here at attention. What do you want? We have a lot of time to read books to everyone. I also supported her quietly with the corner of my mouth. Molai looked at us attentively, and equally attentive was the look of her companion. He had very beautiful brown eyes, and in general he resembled either Jewish or pre-revolutionary intellectuals. But it didn't matter to me what kind of eyes he had. Thank you. I don't need anything yet, I said. I'd like to stay with my grandson. To say goodbye. Of course. Nina nodded. Why don't one of the girls clean up and organize your things? Thank you, I told Molelai. She was still sitting there with her back straight as a string. We went out and Vanessa, who was bolder, hard to embarrass in general, immediately inquired, Why is she saying goodbye to him? Nina, he is leaving the other day, explained our main abroad in France long business trip. My grandmother has a heart condition, and he was afraid to leave her alone and hire a nurse. So there is not one to hire 2 or 3 at least. Sighed Nina. She wildly now in 3 good, responsible non-drinking and with professional skills. But if anything, until the ambulance will call, and until that will come. We're more reliable here, and the old lady asked for the deed. She doesn't look like an old lady, Vanessa said doubtfully. We did the usual things, washed the tents and corridors to a shine, cleaned the plumbing, served and took out the ship, fed the bedridden. But thoughts of the office kept up. I don't know about Vanessa, but I wondered how it was that she agreed to change her apartment, probably huge, well-maintained, but living with us. Why does she only have a grandson? Where are the children? Will she be too capricious? It's still unpleasant to be seen not as a human being, but as a low-level servant. The new girl refused to eat in the dining room and didn't ask me to bring her plates to her room. How did the grandson leave? We didn't see. But after lunch, the new lady was visited by Kevin. He stayed with her for quite a while and came out with a strange look on his face. Very often I've seen him close the door to a sick person as if he were closing a page. His expression changes immediately, and he hurries off to do other things. Sometimes comes out irritated. At times there is a sigh of relief, but from Moeleloi he came out pensive. He started booing something light. Then he shook his head, laughed, and went on his way. He closed the door to his office carefully. We didn't visit the new girl until evening. Her room was cleaned. Molly is a walker, so our help was not needed. I stopped by to call her for dinner. My shift was ending. After dinner, Lucy, the night nurse, came on duty. When we heard my knock, yes, I quietly opened the door and peeked in. Molly was sitting in front of me and styling her hair. Her gray hair in a high wave. The overhead light was out. Only the table lamp on the table was lit and picture frames appeared on the nightstand. A shawl was thrown on the headboard, blue with long tassels. It was no longer a ward, but a room. "Shall we eat in the dining room?" I called, and after a short pause, I added, "Or shall I bring it to you here?" Molly looked at me carefully. Daria suddenly turned to me, and I was surprised that she remembered my name so easily and spoke to me as if she had known me for a long time. "You're busy tonight." All my surprise is gone at once, and it's beginning, I thought. Help me unpack, unpack, unpack. I'll read, like scratch my back. Well, I let Lucy do it, but Molly didn't let me think long about what duty she wanted me to do. "Would you go to the movies with me?" she asked. That's not what I expected. The last time I'd been to a movie a couple of years ago, our guests hadn't even thought about it. There was a nice plasma TV in the living room. Sometimes they fought over the programs. Some wanted to watch a movie, some wanted to watch the news, and some wanted to watch a soccer match. Molly had her own TV in her room. What about it? I was confused. They won't let you go, I guess. They can't, but this isn't a hospital. Molly grinned. I'm perfectly capable. It's different if you're expected at home. I can go alone, but the company's a different matter. I've never had small children. Andrew, I'll explain it all sometime, especially as time went on and we became more and more estranged, so the movie theaters are far away. I continue to be perplexed. I'm not even close. We'll call a cab, Molly said conspiratorially. What time did you get off? 8 o'clock. I couldn't get my act together. So we'll go to the last session. Come on, finish up. I'm waiting for you. God be with you. I don't need any help. When you're done, get dressed and come back for me. What movie do you want to see? Tula waved his hand. You know, I don't want to see a cheesy melodrama anyway, but anything will do. I'm just in the mood tonight. As a girl, when I was sad, I'd beg my mother for a few hryvnias and went to the movies. I'd be very grateful if you keep me company. Anna didn't let me down. When I went to her door at the beginning of the 9th, she answered me already dressed, in her light-colored cloak. Elegant hats, even gloves, were on her hands. It was a strange feeling to stand there, as if with a girlfriend, waiting for a cab to pick us up, to go to the movies, to let ourselves be entertained. I had the feeling that this had not happened in my life for 1,000 years. I didn't feel like I was accompanying an old lady at all. The residents of the nursing home. I know that Seva will be fine, Anna said. But it's still hard to part when he is going so far away. Of course, we will contact each other every day by email. We will, of course, email each other every day. Oh, Grandma again, I thought. So the laptop I saw on her desk is not a toy or a tribute to fashion at all. And your grandson? Where are his parents? Frank was raised by me, but my daughter died very young. Pneumonia in the hospital, and the doctors didn't save her. I didn't ask about Frank's father. More than half of my Russian girlfriends have children alone. The cab driver, a young guy, who arrived in a silver Priora, ran us to the lobby. In 10 minutes, Anna didn't need any help. A little upset, she jumped out of the car. And it was impossible to imagine that she would behave in a large shopping center as a grandmother, who God knows how long has not gone out. More like me. There were 2 ways to get up to the 4th floor, where there were cinemas and cafes, either by escalator or elevator. We headed for the glass elevator car. The elevator was made. So interesting that it looked like the cabin was going straight down into the fountain. Tourist-style metal, glass, and jets of water. We were going up to the 4th floor, and I noticed Anna's small hands in lacy black gloves. It seemed to me that as we walked out, she would take me under her arm confidently and lightly, like her companion. But it didn't take a cloud for her to read me. We were standing in front of the ticket office. Well, asked Anna what we were going to watch. Since the time is late, no children's sessions and fairy tales will obviously not be in their program. We'll have to choose between this and that. She nodded at two brightly colored posters. But please, no animation. I can't stand animation. It smelled like popcorn and warming butter. The clerk, though tired, looked at us curiously a couple times. The door to the small, cozy movie room was open. We picked out the odd movie. Liam Neeson, an almost gray-haired artist, played the owner of a funeral home. On his iron table was a girl in a red dress who had just been in a car accident before our eyes. The girl assured him she was alive. Liam Neeson convinced her that she had passed away and showed her the death certificate. It's just that her death was so sudden that to this day her soul is still sort of between two worlds. And he, the owner of the funeral home since childhood, is endowed with a mysterious gift to see such souls, to communicate with them. The mystery was that, and we viewers to the end could not understand whether the girl is alive, as it is undoubtedly believes she herself, or Liam Neeson is actually her killer, set up all this coincidence. Now the girl escapes from the funeral home. She's moving toward home for some reason. She appears and disappears like a ghost. And then she comes back and she says, in a low voice, "I'm weaker." No wonder the undertaker answered her, "Your time is almost up. I love this artist. He's one of a kind." In any case, he embodies such images that it is not at all scary to walk next to him, holding his hand or holding his back and looking at life itself as a movie. No matter what happens, dangerous bad things will not affect you. Suddenly I didn't feel good. A bad or some strange anxiety came over me. "What's wrong with you and your anxiety?" asked Anna, looking into my face. The lights were on in the hall. "You're all sweaty." "Wait, I'll get some tissues." She unzipped her small purse, took out a pack of paper napkins and handed them to me. I tried to smile at her, but the smile came out crooked and my fingers trembled. When I pulled out the napkin, "Oh, you were shaking. Let's go somewhere else," he said worriedly. "Let's sit down. I think there's a cafe nearby. Do you need something to drink? But don't worry, for God's sake. It's a small thing to me in the sense of money. There's something wrong with you. I can see that. Come with me." She was the one who kept me going when we went to the cafe. She chose a table in the corner and ordered. If I had been alone, I probably would have sighed at the price of each cup of coffee and chosen the cheapest. Anna ordered us ice cream. "You have glasses." It was sprinkled with chocolate and nuts over a high-priced cup of coffee and a glass of red wine. All this was placed in front of us by an obliging waiter. Very young, maybe a part-time student. He bowed slightly and disappeared. We were almost alone in the cafe, unless you counted the bartender behind the glass counter. There behind the walls was my favorite, the month wistful and endless. And here in the ghostly flicker of lights in the semi-darkness in the whispered voice of the singer in French, I could already feel the holiday. And after the new year, as we know, will come spring. Anna was picking up coffee grounds and foam with a spoon. "Do you want to tell me what happened? What's got you so worried?" I took a sip of wine. Red, sweet, fortified. I didn't know what would help me now. Anna looked at me and turned the conversation around. "You're probably wondering why I'm here, aren't you? Well, I kind of wanted to. Imagine, I'm a girl from a military family used to move from city to city. I couldn't sit in one place for a long time, and then I had to choose the same job. First, I worked in a magazine with a camera, traveled all over the country. It was hard to get out of the country back then. Not only did you have to be politically above board, you had to have a chance. As they say, the stars aligned in the sky. But I'm very grateful to fate for that time. I've been where today's travelers are unlikely to go. They may have traveled around Europe and Asia, marveled at Easter Island. But here in this vast, undiscovered country, you can be Columbus the discoverer. And this is what the world looks like when the sun goes down. In the summer, I used to wander barefoot in the shallows by the sea on a dare. We didn't live long, but we lived in the deep taiga, like on an island. And what are the nature reserves worth? To get a good shot, I'd go where men wouldn't dare to go. I was jokingly called a mountain goat. I saw a crocodile a few meters away. Not in a zoo, but in the taiga. Everything that man can master from the cave city to the caves. It's also a whole world of wonder. There is a feeling of complete detachment from reality, as in space. And the scenery around is completely alien. When my Natasha was born, I had to stay at home. I still did not think that babies will be good in expeditions, intense by the fire. And then I started writing books. It fascinated me so much that I no longer regretted that my life had changed. After all, the journey to which our imagination sends us, they are not inferior to real ones. I saw a lot of things and I wanted to share them. And my heroes could have had much more heroic fates. What are their prototypes? My husband. You're going to ask about him too. We were a kind of tandem. He's a journalist for the same magazine. I'm a photographer. He didn't believe I could write at first. I'd only ever captioned photos before. We've been around each other too much. But what beauty is there when in the morning, climbing out of the tent, we are not yet honest? After 10 days of camping, after sitting by the fire, you have to have eyebrows as red as a grouse. You could say we sought each other in our underwear. And now I was back in front of him in my underwear when he left. A robe over a nightgown. Nancy clutched to his chest. And there's a young girl, an aspiring journalist he met in the newsroom. Of course, he found her much more seductive than me, whom he knew inside and out, so to speak. And then there was a period when I was getting on my feet in literary terms, writing my first things. I hadn't been published yet, and then the first stories began to appear in magazines. It's not a quick thing. As long as you write a manuscript, send it in, submit it, it gets accepted. That's if you're lucky. And they decide to put in such and such a number, such and such a number. Maybe in a few months or maybe next year. Anyway, I remember that scene so well. When Nancy arrived, it was already 15. So he hadn't seen her in years. It's like getting to know a stranger and yet knowing it's a stranger to you from the closest person in the world. Father and daughter in that new family, he had 2 sons. And here we are sitting in the kitchen. What was that scene? I already had a full-time job, of course, another literary magazine. I'm a member of the Writers' Club. I needed these crusts, actually, to collect materials for my next things. I didn't give up my camera. It used to serve as my eyes. But now I could see with my inner eye much more than what the optics could capture. And still a camera to the rescue. I didn't look so bad. When a person is passionate, he can be anything. But still this aura around him, this light, because in front of a person, as if a light is burning, he lives not like most people, as if a day-to-day, when as if a day-to-day just lives, he goes to the goal so beautiful for him. And now the flame of this goal seems to light the way not only for him, but also for others. What's beside him? Nancy Anna a little audibly, sighed half-heartedly. A small and so serious little man, such big eyes clear. It's not that she studied perfectly. She finished school with a medal, then geological, with a red diploma. It's just that at that time, she had her whole childhood with her. That's how children divide the world into good and bad, fair and square. Valor and meanness is a very strict judgment for us adults, without any compromise there. In this case, she ran her dry palm over the smooth surface of the wooden table. And there was no one to judge. Sitting in front of us is a Mujitonka like this. You may not believe it, but it was hard for me to even imagine that he was once my husband, has long been on paperwork correcting other people's manuscripts. He doesn't write, but sits down. I guess his young wife demanded this sedentary life. And what expeditions? Now they have to feed, secure loans, pay from paycheck to paycheck. To patch holes in the budget, and these small worries gnaw at him like mice. His face is already wrinkled, and as if he has not been happy or admired anything for 1,000 years. As it turned out, we had nothing to talk about. He awkwardly asked Nancy if she needed anything. And she said she didn't need anything. I mean, what can you ask of a man like that? It's like a donkey pulling a cart with heavy sacks, and you dump another sack on it. And then another. Yes, Nancy always settled for something small. She didn't care what kind of boots she wore, as long as they didn't leak. And her hair was like that. It's rare to see a braid as thick as her arm nowadays. But to tell you the truth, I didn't feel guilty about her directly, that I didn't give her anything in life. I was doing it all for her. She didn't need much, and I didn't need much. And the fact that she had listened to my stories since she was a child. She wanted to be a vagabond too. She was also drawn to the road. And then it seemed to me that she repeated my fate under some crazy copy of the expedition. Eyes wide open with delight. The harshest conditions didn't frighten her. And love again. Only this one turned out to be married. Tula ran her hand across the table again. Nancy arrived from her expedition, pregnant, and as in a bad movie, his daughter came to her, waved about 8 years old. Only a huge white blouse, she said, and her voice was ringing and trembling. Auntie, I want to ask you very much. Don't leave me and my mom or dad. We love him very much. I guess her mother taught her to do that. Well, Natalia remembered how she herself had done in life, how she grew up. I guess somewhere in her heart she wanted to have a daddy too. Well, she broke up with this man forever. She just closed the door in front of him and said it's none of his business what happens to her next. And it was bad, I guess, for me. It was my business. And for her he served as a light. And when that flame went out, Natasha and I became as if extinguished. She's so thin. And soon after she gave birth to a son from her first illness, she died. We used to be able to get pneumonia and recover. We get back on our feet. And then there's a big city and hospitals and IVs and professors. And I kept Nancy. I had to hold on so that no one would even think that my grandmother would not be able to raise a grandson. So I held on. I adopted a boy. It was possible to raise him so that he wouldn't know his mother at all. And his father even less. He had no memory of his own. But I used to tell him about Nancy and what she was like, and how she grew up, and where we went with her, and the funny things that happened to us. The kids love it. They ask me a lot. Tell me about when I was little, he asked me. Tell me how little mommy was. Thank God, he wasn't interested in geography, but in languages. He was fluent in French by high school, and I'm only for the special school tutor Foreign Language Institute. That's how he got into the institute, and my whole began to fall apart like a house of cards. Everything I was holding on to. And I began to make friends with doctors more and more often, especially after the heart attack. And now my grandson is a translator for a large company sending him to Paris for 6 months. He'll have to translate documents there. And he's like, I'll leave you, Mom. He calls me Mom too. It's just so unusual to call me Mom with a name. What if at night you don't have the strength to call an ambulance? I convince him that I'm going to write a new book. It's better than any pills. As long as I'm writing it, I'm holding on. I've checked. And he can't leave if I don't feel good about you. I'd rather not. That's when I came up with this boarding house. I don't need much. It's a private room. Only because I need to be alone when I'm writing. Otherwise, I'm always in public. If there's anything I need help with, I guess. When my grandson comes home, of course I'll come home. Your ice cream glasses have long since been emptied. The coffee was drunk. Anna ordered another glass of wine. Starting a conversation is always difficult. At least for me. I'm always the one who gets the first sentence. It comes out so clever. It's hard to even understand what I'm trying to say. But this time, I guess I can't look as far ahead as you do. I said, not looking at Anna and twirling the spoon in my hands. I know it's silly, I guess. But I think my family life is going down the drain. I told you everything. There were no secrets to hide. Anna reached out her hand as if she wanted to cover my hand with her palm. But at the last moment, she changed her mind. And that's good, because I don't like to be reached. Anna drummed her fingers on the table. And you intend to forgive all this? She asked. Or do you only blame yourself? I shook my head. I have a strange feeling. I just can't think about the future. You're right, Anna said thoughtfully. And your doubts don't seem delusional to me. Let's think about it. Maybe you should go away and live separately. To start all over again. He answered himself. It's unlikely you have no home now, no job other than this one. You don't have any money set aside for emergencies. No, I shrugged. Of course, I could do something, like rent a room. Here in this city, I need to sort myself out. Something's going on in my soul. Has his attitude towards you changed since that incident? I think I'm becoming less and less his wife, more and more a stranger. Sweet boy, the waiter came to tell us it was 10 minutes till closing time. We paid. Calling a cab, Anna asked, "And thank you for telling me everything. We'll figure something out together." A few days later, I realized I was pregnant. I felt awful. My head felt heavy all the time, nauseous, and the day ahead of me with its 1,000 responsibilities. There was little hope in 2 cups, tea, coffee, and a couple of pills, which I always kept in my purse. And the golden autumn lived its life. The day outside the window is gray, cold slush, and I crossed the threshold and smells of milk porridge and pierogi, warm on the shelf waiting for me light blue slippers. Our old people are just waking up, but the hallway was already brightly lit. As I passed the hallway, I thought that on Christmas Eve, the Christmas tree would flash its lights mysteriously, and we will put presents under it, as we did last year, for all the inhabitants of our house. They'd be delighted at the very sight of those shiny boxes tied with bows. But not everyone can go down the hall. So Vanessa changes into her Santa Claus costume. Because of her size, she's always Santa Claus. And we'll go to those who can't get out of bed. And not everyone's relatives are coming. New Year's Eve is a busy time for everyone. And just give yourself a break. You want not to get up from the couch, stupidly watch TV. I can understand that. I would right now too. Aside from the ceiling of little daily chores, change diapers, wash, handle, feed, mop the floors. There were some extra chores today. Wendy made a house call to the ENT doctor for today. She was very annoyed that her hearing was dropping, and a barber was to visit us that day to give haircuts to all the men and women who wanted them. We called a barber once a month. I wanted to stop by Anna's house to say hello and ask how she was after yesterday. After all, for an old woman, half a bottle of wine in one person is a healthy violation of her diet. But Anna was still asleep. I saw only the motionless outlines of her fragile figure under the blanket. It was a rough night tonight, Lucy complained, turning in. Why? Vanessa asked. We were changing into our nurse's uniform, a short robe and pants. But for Vanessa and her figure, it was more appropriate to call them pants. So did Lucy hold out? She sat in our tiny cubbyhole and took her time getting up from the couch to change. First, this new grandfather on the second belly suffered James from Ward 8. Vanessa never confused anyone. She memorized all our new residents at once. Yeah, he's breaking it from the semolina. And he didn't say anything to anyone. And his family didn't tell him. And that's what we had for dinner. I changed his diaper 4 times last night. He won't stay in a dirty one for a minute. Weak old man. And what a voice. And how stupid everything is, and people talk loudly. And here she's screaming all the way down the hall. Lucy, sign it. I'm shitting myself again. It's a good thing he was in bed. I would have collapsed by morning. And Wendy put on quite a show. First, she demanded I take her blood pressure. Then her heart was racing. Gave her some drops. Then she wants her blood pressure taken again, and she better call Kevin to come over. Because I've seen enough. You're waiting here? You can't wait till we're all dead. Less work. What a parasite. Vanessa couldn't take it anymore. Aha. And now she after her night concert, which is not by request of workers, crumbles to her. The doctor will come today, and you'll find yourself to blame again. I'm just making eyes at you, and here you are disturbing me with your buckets and mop. How do I understand her relatives? Who would chew on such a girl? Can she stand it at home? The day rolled on, but thoughts did not go out of my head, and that in normal times, and things that in normal times wouldn't be annoying, which I would have laughed at this time, forced me to be silent and not to snap. Chuck and William, when I scrubbed their floors, once again argued Chuck all his life, and in recent years, and especially was convinced that there was no more terrible strain in life, more tremendous work than the war. That was the first time I heard that from him, by the way. And what do you think? A daughter and a battle is work, hard work. And between battles, we never let the shovel out of our hands. Digging and digging trenches. It was a pity to leave them when we had to. And such labor, especially in winter, was freezing on the ground. And how many days we didn't sleep on the move. Supported each other by the hands on the march. About us. You probably didn't even think that we also plow with our last strength. Where are the horses? William was getting hot. Don't you want a lumberjack? Or our army didn't need wood? Or were we not a labor front? Only the horses were spared more than us. I had to have a hernia operation. I was already in the hospital, but only some scum bribed him to take my place. And I had huge trees to fell. I got there and watched these logs floating down the river, and I had no strength to stand up. The wind shook me, and yet death was not standing over you every minute. Chuck shook his head. There's one kid I won't forget. He wasn't 18 years old yet, probably, and so he wanted to lie behind my machine gun. I let him. As long as there was a lull, no bread yet. I didn't realize that the machine gunner was being hunted. I turned around with an empty kitten, and he was lying there. A sniper's bullet right in his forehead. And death didn't hunt for us. And death didn't hunt for us. William exploded. Did you even have a hero? At least you knew your mother and wife would get a funeral. Got a brave death. And from us it didn't come. They died like flies. They were treated like flies. So, in general, they swatted the grave. When else will the relatives find out if they dare to ask? From illness, from hunger, from weakness at work. The Urkas will slaughter him. There were 1,000 reasons. You've been eating your lunch out of a pot. And as a great favor, when we were on kitchen duty, we were allowed to lick the kettles of convicts in the hermitages. They're empty, but the walls shine. It is the bosses can soup a few spoonfuls at the bottom or porridge to the walls burned. It depended on it whether we survived or not. And you'll never get that shame out of my soul. And now, when my granddaughter asks me, why didn't you, grandfather, fight in the war? What could I tell them? Practical Chuck was a very kind man. He didn't want to argue at all, especially not with William. They agreed on a lot of the same books, loved the same books, remembered the same things about our town. When one of them felt unwell, the other would rush for the nurse or Kevin to call for help. We had our kinks, of course, he agreed. And you can tell your granddaughter that you did a lot as a labor front, too. You were rehabilitated. It must have been a small thing. The carelessness of denunciation. I didn't want to snitch, and what's 8 years for espionage? And that my father and brother were taken in my case and both stayed in the camps. My father, an old village teacher, died in a lumber camp. Foresaw his end, wrote William, I feel I'm going to die soon. Slowly preparing my mother for this thought. He died on a steamship on his way to Magadan. We got the certificates afterwards. Buried at sea. I did little flooring in their room. I knew in advance what each of them would say. Tula I saw already after lunch our old men were stretching from the dining room, and I recognized among them at once. She had as straight as a back and walked slowly only because Wendy was in front of it. Anna saw me too. She called out to me, It'll be a minute. Come to my place. I want to offer you something. There was a time when I couldn't imagine my life without working within 4 walls. After a while, I'd start to flounder. By the end of the vacation, I was bored, but I could do without work now. There was a lot less energy. I would find something to occupy the day and take my time rising and drinking the cup of coffee in a chair by the window with sunlight on my eyelids. Over the years, the imagination develops more and more. And even in solitary confinement, a person does not get bored. After all, one closes his eyes and such pictures appear before him. But maybe, despite all the dirt, all the hard work every day, I am drawn into my work anew. And by the middle of the day, I already begin to love it, because it is impossible not to perceive our house, otherwise as a big family. Today, me and the girls, well, I mean Vanessa, Nurse Kate, Nina, and I stood in the hall and discussed such an exhibition. We're going to do one for Birthday Boys Day. We have one every month. We should catch our old people and take pictures of them so they're as touching as they are in real life. Not just, a face like a passport. We glued them on some large paper boards, and we will write wishes and gifts for each of them near each photo. We should think about it too, Mina said. I've already agreed with a confectionery factory in the form of charity. They will give us candy, so we'll have sweets. All old people like sweets. But to think of some little things to make them happy, Wendy. Helen to buy a package, advised Vanessa. to poke them in the face with the harmful ones they're so excited about. Yes, these ladies will not please. Agreed Nina. And today this Kelly came. Who's who? Yeah, a girl. She's young. She looked at Wendy, gave her these funny candles. You put them in Boucher, and then you light the edges. They're long, and the flame heats up or something. It has this healing effect, so you know where Wendy told her to put those candles. I guess, Nina grinned. You got him by the nod, Vanessa. It's kind of forbidden to swear bad words here, but for her the rules of social life are not an issue. Wait till Helen makes the hairdresser cry, and there will be a full conflict. At least I know what to get Helen, laughed Kate. A glass with a cup underneath. You know, the kind you get on a train, say, from Russian railroads. She'll be touched. There had been more going on in Martha's life lately than in her entire life. She had gotten used to the idea that life would drag on, taking its time and nothing interesting would happen to her. If you thought that way, it made no difference whether you were 20, 30, or 50 years old. In any case, there was another piece of life ahead, which, obviously, would pass in the same way. It was only Mom's cats that were more or less dynamic. And there were kittens in the house, sometimes completely blind and helpless, who had to be taken care of like everyone else. You had to take care of them like all small children, to get up for hunger cries, even at night to warm milk or mixture from a syringe with the needle removed, to warm a film on the radiator, to wrap them in a warm one. They were given sick or mutilated animals. It was painful to look at, and they took them to the veterinary clinic, nursed them back to health after surgeries, gave them shots, washed their eyes, pumped their ears. The happiest thing was to give their pets to new owners, if there was someone who wanted to take them. After all, the animals were all unbred. But cats are amazing. Even if you had to climb for them in a dirty basement, and there they sat and looked at a man with the same haughty, truly royal look. People should learn such a sense of dignity. Martha had a pet, which was already clear that it would stay with them forever. The cat named Bro was middle-aged, striped, and catastrophically fat. His mom had looked him up outside the chicken store, where she buried the backs of her many feline family members for soup. Next to the door lay a fat cat in a collar. Mom bent down to pet him and read the sign on the collar that said, "Good, please don't feed him. He's on a diet." The owner's home address and phone number were listed too. The cat looked at the woman carefully, saw nothing from Yasnov in her hands, and lost interest in her. Then my mother saw Brove more than once, and then met in the same store in line for chicken with his mistress, already not young, but very anxious. "We're going away," she complained. "My mother-in-law is having a stroke. We're moving in with her. I'll take care of the old lady. Only the cat can't stand it. Where will I put the Bro? I don't know. Such a smart, soulful cat. And what did you feed him so?" Perplexed Lilia. "How many cats do I keep? But I have none. Yes, he eats no more than any other cat. The doctor said he had a metabolic disorder and had to go on a diet. No more sour cream, no more cream. And there's the chicken. Fished specialty food additives." Lily kept her eyes on Bro for a couple more days. Then she wrote off his collar and called his landlady's cell phone number. She couldn't bear the thought that such a colorful and affectionate animal would end up on the streets. In the new house, Armour did not quarrel with anyone, fed him separately as he ate without hurrying to taste. At this time, other cats, already finished with their portions of Sambo, leading revenge torpedoes, rushed to his bowl. And who was the first to eat? The one who ate. All fiercely spoiled fed cats lily well, but those who had recently been homeless, there was still a reserve, left appetite for Bro, sat next to him, watched how strangers spread with his food, and confused politely poked Ammer. And then he followed his masters. He looked into their eyes almost humanly expressive and said meow, saying, "I am hungry." That's when Martha took him into her care. Since then, I personally Bro's saucer stood on the windowsill, and Martha stood next to him while he ate, driving away from other applicants. And Brock spent all the time that he didn't eat or visit the cat litter box in Martha and bed, sprawled out on the pillows. What does it say about lonely women and kitties? Sad thought Martha, especially about old maids. She had already resigned herself to the idea that no one would ever fall in love with her. She looked in the mirror for a couple of minutes a day, just to see if her hair was okay. Could she go to work like that? She perceived her apparent lack of beauty as a kind of justification for her loneliness, as an order from above. You have a different destiny, and there's no need to get involved in family life. Lily could never buy her anything that made Martha stand out, that she liked, and her clothes were the most modest. As Martha thought to herself over the refectory, perhaps now. When Martha was already working, she could go shopping and pick up a more colorful and fashionable closet. Well, at least on sale. But it never occurred to her. Finding herself in any large shopping center, she either hurried to the grocery department or dared to go into the household of all these stores and stores, where behind the glass doors rows of skirts hung in rows and feathers stood in rows of boots. It was hardly as if the friendly girls were shying away from them. She subconsciously waited for them to say to her, "Where are you going with your pig's snout?" Sometimes she allowed herself to sit in the center of such a store on special benches for visitors. Even it was a kind of immersion in luxury. The floors shone, on which on special cars from time to time drove cleaners. Murmuring fountain burned a lot of lamps, was always warm, even in winter. To the right carried delicate aromas. There was a department where they sold handmade soap. To the left floated the smell, the freshness of roasted coffee. Nearby, a small kiosk sold dressed-up ice cream, pink and yellow, green, brown, raspberry lemon on Tashkova, chocolate balls in Athens cones. Opposite, sparkled unbearably rings earrings, necklaces in the jewelry department. Passing by, chirping tall girls with long legs, heeled boots, loose hair. They were so young, so confident. Martha rose heavily, picked up the bag that stood at her feet. Bread, cotton laundry detergent, otherwise the smell from the cats would not go away. And going home wouldn't even occur to her. It would have seemed an unthinkable dare to go on a trip. She'd never even seen the sea. Maybe if her mother hadn't started this shelter at home, Martha would have thought about it. What's her excuse in life? Not the numbers she puts into the computer every day at work. The strongest feelings Martha experienced were given to her by books. She was not distinguished by exquisite taste in reading since childhood, swallowed what she could get her hands on in the library. With the advent of the internet, she moved there for her birthday. Her mom got her a cheap laptop. And Martha liked horror stories, all sorts of epics about vampires, werewolves, and bloody villains. She could never identify with the heroine of a love novel because she thought that the image of a gray mouse with her blatant beauty would be too fat for her. But the atmosphere of anxiety, the mystical creatures, the climax of horror gave life the same spice to life as spices to a pleasant dish. And one could be sure. After work, you'd find Martha hogging the corner of the bed, and next to her a brio and a plate with a couple of sandwiches. Martha, or reading away and won't let go until she's done, or watching another movie from the thrillers and horror section. The only friend Martha had was her neighbor Daria, though she was younger, but she was someone she could talk to occasionally, invite unobtrusively for a cup of coffee. True, Daria had a very handsome husband, with whom Martha was always in a state of shock, and as she was visiting a neighbor, she hurried to leave. But when Daria said she was going to live somewhere else, Martha immediately felt uneasy. On the one hand, she shouldn't have cared. Daria has her own family. What did Martha have to do with it? On the other hand, it was a shame to lose her only friend. And Martha knew that Daria wouldn't just leave. After all, she and her husband had recently been newlyweds, dreaming of having children. Suddenly, Daria decided to move out. Maybe there was something she needed help with, and then Martha decided to go to Golden Autumn after work to find out. It was very unusual for her, the whole trip. It was already dark when she finally reached the boarding house with 2 transfers. How did she get there? She had to walk a long way where there were no sidewalks, and on the roadway she had to dodge cars. Several times Martha thought she was going to get hit, and then she breathed a sigh of relief as she walked up to the front porch of the boarding house. Who are you here to see? A woman who sat at the entrance behind a special counter and knitted. The janitor, probably not to be preserved, an old black woman with glasses. On the records, something white airy. It was very warm in the boarding house. It smelled. A porridge. Martha didn't have to go anywhere far. She was glad she could ask right there at once. "Tell me, please, I'm Daria Serebriakova's neighbor. She works here. My mom and I can't reach her. She's doing well. She goes to work as a janitor." She wanted to answer them. But there was a thin old woman walking down the hall. Her gray hair was styled in a high updo. The woman was carrying an electric kettle. She slightly covered her eyes and said to Martha, "Come with me, I'll tell you." Shoe covers, shoe covers. And the janitor shoved Martha a pair of shoe covers made of denim. Anna waited for her while Martha tied those purse shoe covers around her ankle. When she led her to her room, Martha looked around perplexed. "Is this a nursing home? It's a luxury hotel. Such a big room. 2 windows, couch, flowers." It wasn't until Anna invited her in and Martha walked over and sat down that she saw a man sitting in the chair across from her. At the same time, he raised himself slightly, extending his hand to Martha, saying hello, and Anna introduced him. "This is Kevin, our doctor." Briefly, she recounted the whole story to Martha. Daria had been brutally humiliated by her husband. And since she is an orphan, she has nowhere to go. So Anna offered to let her stay in her apartment for the time being. Martha was so shocked that she forgot about the interesting young man sitting across from her. Besides, she had a pattern. The more interesting the man, the more restrained she should be. The last thing she needed was for him to think she'd lost her mind. "Freak. Who do you think you're imposing on?" "Dashka. She's like me, she'll stand up for herself." "No way," Martha agreed. "Kevin, you'll take the girl home." "Sure." And that smile wasn't meant for Martha, of course. It was too much. It's how a man smiles at a woman. What kind of woman is Martha? In the car, Martha tried to behave as conspicuous as possible. She sat in the back seat, cowered in a corner, and kept quiet the whole way. All she said was where to go. All she wanted was to get there as soon as possible. She didn't even feel comfortable in the cab. What surprised her most was that when they arrived, Kevin got out of the car and went to walk her back to her apartment. She had a premonition that as soon as her mom opened the door, her nose would be hit with the cat smell. How much cleaning up after these cats? How much bleach? There's still a new one who has to be accustomed to the clutch. Did Kevin seem slow on the landing to you? Like he wanted to ring the doorbell where Daria no longer lived. Maybe he wanted to talk to her husband. But Kevin only nodded at Martha and started down the stairs. Kevin, on the other hand, thought to himself that Daria would never forgive him, and that it was a terrible thing to fall in love with a friend's wife. And he hardly knew her as a person on that unfortunate evening when the alcohol had played a cruel joke on him and her. What to do now? A serene life had long surrounded him. As a young boy, he had been sent by his parents to his grandmother's care, but it was not the village most of us imagine. At the word grandmother's village, my grandmother became the owner of her ancestors' dacha. Her grandfather, a rich factory worker, had built this wooden terem to bring his large family here for the summer. It stood on a mountain. There were countless balconies, cans, and a slab or two-story house, fanciful wooden lace. My grandfather built this house in 1915. From time to time, the house was painted according to what paint was available. And when in the 90s, grandmother proved that she is a direct heiress of that very factory worker. Local authorities were glad to give her the mansion promised finally. But maybe she'll finish it. At that time, it was scary to enter this place. On the main balcony, the wooden floors had almost collapsed. They had to be rebuilt. The roof was leaking. In the corridor, the pioneers crucified a big bat on a mop. Let them play the ghost, scare the entrance. Grandma sold her luxurious 5-room apartment in the city and invested all the money in rebuilding the family nest. Having finished with the urgent construction work, she even went into the subtleties, trying to return the house to its former appearance. She found a samovar at a jumble sale, then bought a piano with a candelabra from an acquaintance, who was also about to throw it away. Little Kevin could not quite appreciate the troubles of his grandmother, but the house played a big role in his fate, because he perceived it as a living being. Soon creaking became a sight to him. Every staircase step he and the night wake him suddenly, would unmistakably tell what is visible from the window of each room and how the sun wanders through it, at what time the sun peeks through the window, at what time it leaves the main balcony, on which, according to surviving memories of the family of the factory worker, drank evening tea. Before, there was a marvelous view of the plain. Now the trees had grown up around it. If there was anything to admire, it was the forest. But it was here that he had his encounter with the unknown beyond, which later led him to write books. Kevin believed that in the old fireplace lived the housekeeper. His presence was especially felt on the fairy tale days of Christmas, when there was a real hall here, a real Christmas tree, which also seemed to be about the shower bath. In the morning, she was streaked with light from the windows. She was a real forest fir tree. In the evening, however, it was especially bright with glittering rain and trees, drenched in silver and gold. It seemed magical. The houseboy didn't limit himself to a gift put in a special stocking at Christmas. And it was always something mysterious. An old picture night, a ship with a loaf sitting on its oars, and a girl standing in the stern with a lantern in her hand. It seemed you could touch those waves with your finger, that fire in the lantern, or the snow globe in the mesmerizing solitude of the girl sitting on the bench. She was ready to wait an eternity for someone to sit still like that, and the snowflakes kept swirling and swirling above her head. Kevin then was ready to break the balloon, so that the girl at least did not freeze to death or lay under the Christmas tree ornate box. The surprise clappers, each of which was a mystery in itself, and always this one turned out to be put in unnoticed by Kevin. He would, sometimes suddenly, wake up in the night and run to see if the present was already there or not. But he could never catch the houseboy coming. And in the pond behind the house, of course, there were mermaids. And Kevin could never look at the painting in peace, because I'm sure that's exactly what they had going on here. Only he never caught one. And when he was a boy, he often left it on the big mountain. The sun was not by the pond something for mermaids, a hair comb or an old grandmother's shawl. By morning, it was all gone without a trace. At the age of 5, he wrote his first story, dedicated to the same scoops. It was in the fall. He said goodbye to them for the whole endless winter, because who would want to beat the thick ice in one shirt to go ashore and sit in the freezing night, counting in the light of the month his long hair? Kevin went down to the ice more than once, kneeling down and wiping the ice as if he were wiping a window. But all he saw was a mask dead in the snow, a bubble of air. He hoped that a strange maiden face with expressive eyes would penetrate from that side of the ice, and he would understand without words what the mermaid wanted to tell him. He wrote his first stories, though in fact they were probably fairy tales, because they featured the same fairy tale characters, the good and evil spirits of Rusalka's old house, who lived in the old pond, a forest witch who has a hut somewhere in the sky that no one can find. But if you care, you're bound to stumble upon it. And then watch out. And over everything the spirit of the old house with its sturdy doors and other ladders hovered, with the wooden closet that smelled elusively of Grandma's old powder, her perfume with a month lingering in his bedroom window with yellowed tomes of books. When the boys he went to school with came to visit him, they would sit for long stretches of long December, January evenings by the fuel fireplace. That's when his story began. He didn't dare read them from his notebooks, but he told them, and the boys were infected and frightened. "How do you know about the witch?" Alex asked, flapping his nose. Kevin never admitted that it was all made up by him. He told it all to my grandmother. Her grandmother used to tell her. It sounded convincing, and the boys immediately started arguing. "I'm telling you it's by the spring." Alex was hot. "My father and I went hunting when we went hunting. He didn't show me the hunting hut over there. It's abandoned now. That's where the witch lives." "Oh, come on." Mike mockingly contradicted him. "If it were so easy, I would have seen it 1,000 times already. And in fact, you meet her only if you get lost. You have no defense. You don't know where to run to people. That's when the witch comes for you." The boys were soaked. It was getting dark outside the window. And grandmother, who sat by the table and knitted attentively, listened to all this. She also collected notebooks, shoved them carelessly to her grandchildren, folded them, kept them safe. And then, leafing through these notebooks, written in childish handwriting, horrified and ashamed of his naivety, he still no. And he drew from them some ideas that could only come to a child with his imagination. And without realizing it himself, he tried his best to keep that child in him. And yet at first, at his grandmother's request, he got a real profession. He graduated from medical school. He had a rare gift, a brilliant photographic memory. It was enough for him to read a textbook, and he could, closing his eyes, retell what was written there at the exams without any problems. Fortunately, the university had brilliant teachers and Kevin was fascinated by his studies. He graduated, worked in a hospital for a few years, then moved to a boarding house as a doctor to the elderly. But in parallel, he continued to write. His road in literature was relatively successful. After years of refusals, not recognizing poisonous criticism without despair, and the desire to give up everything, he began by winning one literary contest or another. Then there was a novella describing a 19th century boarding house. The girls are taken out of town to a farm where they will spend the whole summer swinging on swings, catching butterflies with a net, reading poetry, and strolling through the alleys under an umbrella. This idyllic picture is shattered by a new pensioner who has just returned from Hungary with her parents. She is full of legends about the vampires, werewolves, and other non-good things there. At first, the girls listen to her stories as scary fairy tales and assure her that here in the wilderness nothing like that can be. But soon Maria comes to a different conclusion. She knows the signs that the girls ignore. Maria realizes that the vampires have reached those places, and if not to fight them, all awaits doom. And only she, knowing from ancient legends techniques to fight ghouls, manages to stop the invasion of the immortals. This story went to the readers and soon came out a separate book. And then there were more and more. If Kevin once dreamed of a bookshelf on which will stand only his books, then now much has already been written about the ideas in his head dreamed. What's a bookshelf for? A whole rack of books. But over all his works hovered the ghost of the old house. All the fears he so convincingly conveyed to others were born there. If he didn't get a line written in a day, it was an empty day. He was desperately sorry. It had faded into oblivion. Time, after all, could give birth to worlds, for could weave a shining web of intent and words. He did not understand people for whom it was natural and taken for granted to waste days and years going to work. Good, if more or less favorite, but more often the one with a heart he was indifferent to. And then to come back tired and live out the evenings at a desk, sitting in front of the TV or going out with friends, but not creating anything that time would preserve. Kevin considered such people the hotels of life, the mad motors of far more than had ever descended. And the hand of some madman in a casino. It was about life. Writing anything now. He asked his acquaintance when he had high hopes. Thoth looked away for a moment. But now you realize, brother, there's no time. But I have a book lying around that I've started. Kevin, I wanted to say that life will never give so much time that you can drown in your work. And a book forgotten for years dies, too. Its characters, it's made flat and cardboard. He sat down to his work at 4, giving it his best hours, when he had strength and his head was fresh, and got up having done what he set out to do. Then he could live like all normal people, work at his main job, meet with friends, go to the theater and stores. But more often than not, he didn't do it like everyone else. He went wandering wherever he could get something for his new thing. Even if not a picture that evoked this or that association, the thought of God knows how this mysticism of creativity originates. A branch of kachut in the fall sky lit by a window snowcap on the ridge posts. Everything could miraculously be reborn, become a page in a book. And you don't get bored sitting in this town for years. A schoolmate once threw it to him. He just told me how he'd come back from Spain near the hotel. There he lived as sunbathed, bathed, what he ate, where he went on excursions. He was rubbing his phone, showing countless pictures from the I'm in the Background series. He wanted to emphasize that if it weren't for the job he toils at from morning to night, there would not have been this 2-week trip to Barcelona in his life. And from the thrust of the full, Kevin took off his glasses. They were sitting in a cafe that, contrary to the trends of the time, had been there for 50 years. Their parents used to come here for tea and chocolate scrap when they were students. Then they themselves used to come here for coffee and condensed milk during their college years. It was also glorious. Coming back from the movie theater, freezing to a state or hole. Running in here and getting an empty, steaming cup in their hands. The same were now standing in front of Arseny and his companion. Even the cups haven't changed. What do you think it's like to live a boring life without going anywhere? He asked again. How did you come to be so spiritually poor that you are bored with yourself? He wanted to say that he too was going to the Iberian Peninsula someday, to stand outside the cathedral in honor of the Holy Family and hear the wind singing, resonating off the towers. Antoni Gaudí thought that the music of the Creator himself would be heard here. You can't record such a thing on a tape. But he held back and kept silent. Suddenly did not realize by his friend it was secondary to the quality of the hotel, where to live and the food, which could be tasted and admired or bypassed in a foreign country. Anna, with whom he was separated by years of generation, was closer to him in this respect, and of course, when she asked him for any favor, he was always happy to try to fulfill her request. But when Martha got into his car, this not very young and not at all pretty girl wrapped her arms around herself, an instinctive gesture that shows one is closed to socializing and talking, a gesture of don't touch me. It made him look at her more closely. There was that depth and subtlety in her that meant beauty to him in the first place. And she was helpless, so helpless. He felt like walking her back to her apartment, leaving her already safe. And then he was coming home and already approaching the entrance. He looked up at his windows. He always left a light on in the hallway. And now he saw the clear silhouette of a dog standing with its front paws on the kitchen windowsill. The dog was gazing at the subject outside the window waiting. I was unspeakably lucky. I realized that my job had to be changed immediately for several reasons. And because of the fact that I am now not allowed to do heavy physical labor. And when you're caring for the sick, you can't do it. But most importantly, I didn't want anyone to know about my pregnancy except Anna. And first of all, Kevin. It would have been a horror of horrors for me, as the young people say. If he had to go against his feelings and marry me like a decent man, I no longer hoped to find a suitable place for me. When I saw an announcement that a small store needed Florescu, I went for an interview and quite unexpectedly I got the job. And I warned the owner that I was pregnant. But she said if everything is good with my health, I will try to reduce the maternity leave to a minimum. I will give almost everything that I earn nanny, but work will not quit. And I got the go-ahead. It was as if I got to my favorite profession and worked frantically self-consciously. I came long before the opening of the store and stayed in it until almost midnight. Good thing the smell of flowers didn't irritate me. In a small pool in the middle of the hall floated roses. I pulled them out of the absorbent cotton, fresh, as if they'd just been plucked from the bush and dewdropped. With my first paycheck, I rented a small studio apartment near the store. I thanked her for being kind enough to let me stay with her and gave her back the key to the apartment. Honey, you still don't want to tell Kevin? Anna didn't go on. She knew I'd figure it out. No, I said firmly. And your husband, Andrew? I've only heard rumors, and believe me, he started courting our neighbor Martha. Poor girl. I remember her, Anna said thoughtfully. She used to come to see me. Poor thing, she had such a battered look. That's why he chose her. I said. He has a thing about children, some kind of mental disorder. He's incapable of procreation himself, but he wants a submissive wife who'll do whatever he says, spend the night with whoever he says or does. I feel sorry for Martha, but she seems to be in love and won't listen if I tell her the truth. But you can sue for housing. I guess that's what I'll do. I've been thinking, the apartment's in his name, but I put up my own money. I think I can prove it. I'll get over the whole thing and do it. When he said goodbye, he crossed me with a blessing. It's nearing the end of a gloomy autumn evening. Outside the window, the rain changed to snow and vice versa. I wasn't expecting anyone, unless some young man would run out to buy a rose to give to his beloved on a date. It was warm in the pavilion. I made several bouquets, which I expected to sell the next day. Quietly, the bell at the door jangled. I looked up. Kevin was standing in front of me. It was impossible to hide the pregnancy, but he wasn't looking at my changed figure. He was looking into my eyes. "Doria, will you marry me?" he asked. It was probably the most romantic setting, fragrant with roses and lilies, and then a declaration of love. I realized that Anna had broken her promise to keep quiet and told Kevin everything. Maybe I should have been proud, let him know that I would think about it. But I was waiting so long for those words that I could only nod. I hadn't seen Andrew for a long time, and even though we lived in the same town, he was out of my sight, and that was good. I did work until almost the birth, although Kevin asked me to leave the place and devote all my time to taking care of myself and the baby. In the early spring, I gave birth to a baby boy. Kevin had said many times that he dreamed of having a daughter like me, but he was happy when he held his son in his arms. On a lovely May afternoon, we were walking in the park with the stroller. Peter was a very calm baby. We had been walking for about an hour, and he was still doozing serenely. "Would you like some ice cream?" Kevin asked me. He went to the kiosk, and I stood in the shade and waited for him in the distance. I noticed another couple, Andrew and Martha. My poor girlfriend looked completely miserable. I realized that she'd heard her companion say something derogatory. Andrew met my eyes. No, he would not be able to subdue and break me again. I saw him bring his hand to his lips. He seemed to want to bite it to hold back a cry of rage and indignation. Too happy. In his opinion, I had the look. I turned toward Kevin, who was approaching us with 2 ice cream sundaes.
Subscribe and click the bell. While some people are barely making ends meet, others are complaining about the resorts and expensive cars. Stephen, the only son of the owner of a chain of hotels and a fleet of pleasure boats, managed to join it all by the age of 13. Egypt. Sorrow. Grimacing when a classmate bragged about an upcoming trip. This Egypt sucks. Nothing interesting about those pyramids. The 5th one was okay. Stephen told me about his trip to Thailand. And Phuket is a green bore. The classmates whispered about it. And John, a famous wit, ironically said our Stephen to listen to. So grow up in a wealthy family, what a challenge. But there is some truth in it, shrugged Lisa. Stephen has long ago lost the joy of even the same trip to Egypt or Thailand. He is no longer surprised by anything. Boredom, interrogation, security, that's all emotions. Yes, John nodded. The Wallace family was one of the richest in town. Their family name was not only in the ears of the rich, but also of the average citizen. There was nothing strange about that. After all, a well-known businessman in the city offered hotel rooms and pleasure boats of different price categories. That means that his services could be used not only by the wealthy, but also by the poor people. Both those and others were treated to the highest standards, and there were no dissatisfied people. Therefore, many people repeatedly returned to the hotels and took boat trips. John Wallace inherited the hotel business from his father. At that time, it was only a couple of hotels. In 10 years, the business has grown to a whole network of luxury hotels with different degrees of stardom. But Mr. Wallace did not think to stop there. He reasonably assumed that guests of the city would be interested in exploring local attractions. But a mere sightseeing tour seemed like yesterday to him. What about a boat ride? It was said and done. To begin with, 3 boats were purchased. The calculation was right. Boat rides were in high demand, which meant that new boats had to be purchased. Now there is a park of 27 boats at the service of residents and guests of the city. The future was predetermined for many years ahead. He graduates from the institute and enters the business. And later, of course, he would inherit the family business. Did Stephen want to go into business? It's hard to say. The guy didn't like boredom. His soul constantly demanded a holiday. And business is, above all, routine. But being not a stupid guy, Stephen already learned in elementary school that it is thanks to business he will be able to maintain his life at the level to which he is accustomed. But then, the hotel business means interaction with foreign partners, trips around the world to exchange experiences and other interesting events, including international ones. All this gives an opportunity to minimize the routine. Growing up in a fabulously wealthy family was fun, easy, and enjoyable. The Wallaces traveled extensively. They had real estate not only within the country, but also abroad. And not ordinary, but elite. When there was a family feast to be had, not an entree of chefs from the best restaurants, maids, designers, musicians, and sometimes Amadou. At every Stephen birthday party, there were animators and, on occasion, entertainers. All the boy's wishes were guessed and fulfilled at the snap of his fingers. What can we say? The childhood of Stephen Wallace was cloudless, except that in this cloudless childhood was just unbearably lonely. The father, although he did not neglect communication with his son, was not much at home. Kathy, Stephen's mother, went around the salons, stores, and social events, leaving him in the care of a nanny. Besides, it was not safe to be the child of wealthy parents. When Stephen was put in kindergarten, Mr. Wallace hired a security guard for him. God forbid they steal him for ransom. Stephen could not help but realize that he was a tidbit for those who would make a fortune out of other people's misfortune. So he tolerated the presence of the guards without complaint. Though, God knows, he was terribly embarrassed in front of his peers. To go outside and splash around in a puddle. But no, that was a pleasure Stephen couldn't afford. Just in case some homegrown paparazzi takes a picture of John Wallace's only hair splashing in a puddle. That would be embarrassing. So in everything we touch, he's Wallace's son. And that says it all. Stephen has entered the 11th grade, and one of the family's most pressing issues is his education. In this regard, the Wallaces, unlike most rich people, gave the boy complete freedom of choice. "I'm not going to pressure you in any way," John said. "The choice is yours. Wherever you want to go, that's where you go. In fact, my plans for education do not conflict with your wishes," said Stephen, smiling. "I want to enroll in hospitality management. I've already looked into it. Is that really what you want? Well, why not? Shrug our family business. It's pretty interesting. So why not explore it in detail? You know what I mean." Dad said approvingly. "Yeah, you're right. It's very interesting, and I'm proud of you." "Yes, there's nothing to be proud of yet," replied Stephen modestly. "You don't say," John replied cheerfully. "The fact that you're showing zeal is something to be proud of. I'm sure you will succeed." "Thank you for your confidence," smiled the son. "There's one thing I'm not sure about." "What's that?" "I'm not good at math." Stephen waved his hands. "And at the university I'm interested in, they study it." "Is that a problem nowadays?" exclaimed Wallace Sr. "Let's hire a tutor. It's a piece of cake." After studying several candidates on the website of the agency providing services in St. Petersburg, Wallace decided to stop at Adriana. Reviews about the 32-year-old tutor were already impressive. Yes, and a red diploma from the math department of the local state university was a weighty plus. At the interview, the young woman showed herself a real professional. Besides, the society of a young and beautiful woman is much more pleasant than that of a dull person of uncertain age wearing old women's glasses. Anyway, Adriana's candidacy was approved. When Adriana graduated from high school, the question of further education was not even a question. In fact, it was solved even when Adriana was in elementary school. Of course, the Pedagogical Institute. The girl answered her mother's question, where she planned to enter. Sofia Semyonovna nodded. What is true is true. As a child, Adriana was very fond of playing school. Besides, she was an excellent public speaker and could find an approach even to the most difficult person. So Adriana had a vocation for pedagogy. And if it is a favored business, then God himself commanded to sow the reasonable, good, and eternal. After graduating from the institute with a red diploma, the girl found a job in one of the municipal schools of the city. Not the limit of dreams, but to start a career is not so bad. But unfortunately, having worked at the school for a year, she fell under the reduction in force. Adriana was worried, and then decided to get a second education. thanks to the university's admission commissions had already started to work. As a result, Adriana became a student of the math department. When she had an internship at the school, the principal almost immediately paid attention to her, and it was no coincidence that the elderly mathematician could not retire for one simple reason: there was no replacement. Adriana seemed to the principal the worthwhile candidate. In addition to her main job, she was engaged in tutoring. The salary of a young specialist left much to be desired, and tutoring services. Besides, with 2 higher education degrees, the pleasure was not cheap. Adriana had heard a lot about the entrepreneur Wallace. The young teacher could not know what kind of character he had, but it seemed to her that Wallace was an extraordinary man. When he wrote Adriana on the website and offered to work with him, the girl could not believe that it was true. Such cooperation unequivocally promised good money, and who knows, recommendations among people of the same circle. Yes, there would be a whole line of people lining up for her. You wish. She pulled herself. He hasn't hired you yet, and you're already making plans. Wallace, exclaimed Betty's friend and coworker. You're growing up, my friend. But I won't say go before I jump, smiled Adriana. But being invited to an interview is already half the success. But I bet you would. A friend said, listen, maybe you should have a Stephen with him. But hello, here we are. I'm going to work for him, not have an affair. But one doesn't preclude the other. A sly wink from my friend. And they, the rich, such entertainment is very much welcomed. How do you know? Adriana snorted. Betty, being the spouse of Nice, the head of the mine site, did not need additional earnings. So her advice puzzled Adriana a little. Not that I know of. Her friend spoke slowly. But my cousin works as an administrator in a sauna, and she gets rich men in her files almost every day. Well, you compared. Adriana replied with a grin. They just have such an association. If a woman works in a sauna, she must be ready for anything. And you cannot change my mind that I, say, just earn money. And I'm a teacher. I'm supposed to be serious. Oh, but what can I do? Or else I waved my hands and, having loaded, added, and I'm not in the mood for romance right now. It's fine by me. You're funny. Nice. Adriana sighed. She'd broken up with Robert not so long ago. That love had gotten Adriana in a lot of trouble, but the young woman had only recently decided to end the relationship. They met at a time when Adriana was getting a second degree. She was in her 3rd year, and Robert was finishing graduate school. After graduating from graduate school, he stayed on to teach at the university. It was then that Robert suggested to Adriana that they should move in together. The young people had been cohabiting for 5 years. It could not be said that the fact of cohabitation so strained Adriana. However, deep down she really wanted Robert to propose a legal marriage. And what loving woman wouldn't want that? Adriana talked about having a child, but her lover said it was too soon. Robert, but I'm already 28. She noticed after a year of living together. Some women my age have more than one child. So what? And if all the girls your age run off to drown themselves, will you follow them? I couldn't think of anything smarter. Adriana burst into flames. What did I say wrong? Because I'm not chasing anyone, she explained. That's what I'm getting at, very early. Actually, at my age it's not very early, but just right. In the West, they have their firstborn after 30, Robert said. What did you say about drowning yourself? Adriana grinned at her roommate. But what's the use? It's a vicious circle. She still repeatedly talked about the child, but there is still there. And before she knew it, Adriana was celebrating her 32nd birthday. Lovely. You shouldn't eat him, Betty said. He just doesn't want a baby. That's the whole story. You're not gonna get a ring or a stamp in your passport. Meanwhile, the biological clock is ticking. So, honey, get out of here. There's nothing there for you. And if you want a baby so badly, find another man with your looks, it's no problem. So tell me, what is it? Adriana waved her hand. You don't know your own worth. Adriana was an attractive girl of short height and figure with a lush mane of dark brown almond hair, prominent eyes, the color of strong tea, and expressive lips. Unless a lazy man said to her, "With that kind of looks you can find yourself the kind of fiancé you want. And you're stuck with that rainmaker." Adriana smiled guiltily. "I love him. What can I do?" But the moment came when things reached a critical point. One day, Robert caught her packing. "Where are you going?" he asked in surprise. "A business trip." "No, Robert," she replied in a vindictive tone. "I'm leaving." "What do you mean?" Stunned lover. Just like that. Adriana waved her hands. "Interesting, interesting," said Robert. "And what was it that didn't suit us?" "It would be very interesting to hear," she grinned seriously. "It's sort of been said more than once." "Not enough money, Robert." "What money? Have I ever told you about money? I kind of make money too. But if you really don't remember that, then what's the point of this conversation?" And it hit me, Robert. "I get that you get it. Do you have someone?" "Of course I do. How could I not have guessed?" he exclaimed. Adriana shrugged her shoulders and let him think what he wanted. In a way, it was flattering. A couple of weeks later, the teacher received an invitation from Mr. Wallace. 3 days after the interview, Adriana began her tutoring duties. To be honest, she was a little afraid of the first meeting with her mentee. It was no secret to the young woman that children of rich parents often behave arrogantly. She herself, however, had not yet encountered them, but more than once she had heard about such an attitude from tutors from the agency. For such outlets, a tutor is something like a servant. That's what something is, not someone. But what is it? Adriana once heard a story about how the 15-year-old son of a rich businessman, I think the owner of a meat packing plant, offered a young tutor money for sexual favors. Do not agreed. And the teenager's mother, having learned about what happened, wrote a statement on the teacher. Since the boy was only 15, the tutor faced a very real term under Article 134. However, in the end, the young teacher got off with compulsory labor and a signature not to leave. But she had to say goodbye to her pedagogical practice for 5 years. From this story, Adriana concluded that it is not worth it to give in to provocations, although such nonsense in her head is simply unthinkable. Intimacy with a student. Ew, that's disgusting. Before the first session of S. Wallace Jr., Adriana studied his social networking profiles. The pages were not closed, which characterized Stephen Wallace as a man of open mind. The heir to 1 billion, if not 1 trillion, turned out to be a tall and lean young man with shoulder-length dark curly hair that he gathered into a ponytail. The only offspring of a hotel and boat owner, definitely loved flashy parties and foreign trips. But what was strange was that he didn't have a single picture of him with a girl. Maybe he's gay, Adriana thought. But why should I care? Judging by the pictures on the wall, the boy was a fan of soccer and expensive cars. All the walls of Stephen's room were covered with pictures of famous soccer players, mostly David Beckham and Cristiano Ronaldo, and cars of mostly outlandish models. Adriana looked around the room with interest, and the guy, judging by his facial expression, liked it very much. "Hello," his tutor greeted him politely. "My name is Adriana." "Hello, I'm Stephen." With a smile, the boy answered her and suddenly asked her, "Are you interested in cars too?" "Well, not really interested," answered Adriana. "But very interesting models. Do you really like it?" Stephen perked up. The guy clearly lacks socialization. It flashed through the tutor's mind. "Do you like it?" She smiled and nodded, not without surprise, noting that her mentee didn't seem to have an ounce of arrogance in him. "But now, we'll get down to the business I'm here for. First, let's check your level of knowledge. It's disappointingly low." "Disarm him," Stephen smiled. "Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting here now." "That's understandable," Adriana nodded. "But still, I suggest you do a little test. We'll determine your level of knowledge, and then we'll decide where to go from here." Okay. The results of the test were truly dismal. The 11th grader was at the level of a 6th grader. Yes, I'll have to work as hard as Pythagoras. Wallace Jr. smiled guiltily, and even to a classmate, thought Adriana, and said aloud, well, do not worry, not God's burn pots. I promise to do my best and hope to be as helpful as possible. Let's get started. The class was at 200 hours and was paid by the hour. When Wallace Sr. transferred an amount to Adriana's card, she was surprised. But that's a lot. It's fine. It's fine. I've been watching you from my office and I can tell you're a real professional, but not a professional. But don't ever say that again. Her employer cut her off. Even if you don't feel like a professional, you don't have to show the look. A person goes to a professional and expects appropriate fulfillment of the task at hand. Yeah. That's just for future reference. Personally, you didn't disappoint me. Thank you. Adriana was born. What are you thankful for? The entrepreneur shrugged. Thank you for your good work. After seeing the tutor off, Stephen thought deeply. She was good. What can I say? For the son of an entrepreneur, beautiful girls were certainly not a novelty. But Adriana, unlike the glamorous dolls in his circle, had a natural beauty. She had a very beautiful face, luxurious dark brown hair, and the figure was just a looker. From the resume tutor, Stephen learned that Adriana Andreevna was 32 years old, but she looked no more than 23. The guy was willing to bet that if her strict suit was replaced by a brightly colored dressy or t-shirt and jeans, the tutor would look even younger. The guy suddenly imagined him and Adriana strolling through the park, and then what would happen next? The rich man's hair didn't think. He didn't have any racy thoughts in his head. There were some thoughts, though. And what boy his age wouldn't have them? Besides, Stephen was ruthless in chasing them away. Was Stephen Wallace a success with the ladies? There was no clear answer to that question. On the one hand, the girls found him quite an attractive guy. The fact that Stephen wasn't stupid was also a plus. But when he started ranting about how bored he was in Thailand, Egypt, or anywhere else, and the Volkswagen is for Beggars Ford, they wanted to crack Stephen over the head. The girls, as well as the guys, thought he was drawing. And Wallace Jr. knew it. But it didn't occur to them that Stephen wasn't even thinking about getting in. The guy was really bored with everything, in connection with which he associated himself neither more nor less with Eugene Onegin. Once he told his father about it, and the latter only laughed with modesty. This is clearly not going to die. Eugene Onegin it is. Jokes are jokes, but Stephen, nevertheless, very much wanted variety in life. But where to find it? The young man did not even suspect that very soon diversity will not make him wait long. And how did he feel about it? Waiting for an answer, Betty glared at Adriana. But she shrugged her shoulders after a moment's silence. He's just a normal teenager, like a lot of teenagers, but from a very rich family. And you know what surprised me? He doesn't have the snobbery of the rich kids. What's your student got to do with it, you fool? Betty laughed. I mean his father. What about his father? I got nothing to surprise you with. A regular rich businessman, by the way, who paid more than the agreed-upon amount. So maybe it's a trick. A wink and a friend. God be with you. Adriana waved her hand. He almost gave me a lecture about positioning yourself as a professional, even if you are not sure of your professional skills. But then you should have seen his wife. When I walked out on them, Wallace's wife drove in a luxury foreign car, sparkling with new diamonds. Not like you and me, anyway. So what? Betty said ironically. We know these FIFO with their diamonds. Both husbands and wives have someone. You know all that about everyone. Adriana grinned. You bet I do, Adriana. But do you really have nothing to say about him? I've only seen him. Not much. He sent me a transfer when I left and told me how to present myself. That's about it. I see. Mrs. Betty, realizing that she couldn't get anything more out of her nosy friend. And you certainly didn't ask Mr. Wallace any questions. Adriana wondered what questions should I have asked. Well, about business, for one. Betty, for a moment. I came to see him as a tutor for his son. She replied with a chuckle. Why the hell would I want to know about his business? Just for general knowledge. What would he appreciate? Why should he? For me, the main thing is for the employer to appreciate my professional skills, not interest in his person. Oh, come on. Betty waved her hand in annoyance. You don't know how to network, do you? I wasn't going to. Adriana parried. He's the employer, and I'm the door. That's it. I don't like to make eye contact. Betty rolled her eyes, letting her friend know she didn't share her point of view. But she didn't care. Stephen Wallace suddenly appeared before Adriana's eyes. The guy has really smart eyes, by the way. What's that about? She asked herself, but she couldn't find an answer. A week passed, and Adriana was pleased to note that her mentee was making good progress. John doubled her salary and promised to recommend Adriana to his wealthy acquaintances. How cool you are, Mishka, Betty said respectfully. Stephen's 16th birthday was 2 weeks away, and his father asked if he had any ideas for a birthday party. I think we've run out of ideas, he shrugged. No way, John shook his head, looking intently at his son. You know what's valuable in a good businessman? Creativity. Yeah, creativity. The ability to develop new ideas and, accordingly, to realize them. That's just as valuable as entrepreneurship. By the way, keep that in mind for the future. I will, nodded Stephen. But I still don't have any ideas. Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. The guy waved his hands. I see. But then it's time to remember that 2 heads are better than 1, said John. Together, father and son developed a script for Stephen's 16th birthday. Dad, said the lad hesitantly. What is encouraging? Smiled the father. Any other ideas? Not really an idea, Stephen hesitated. But I want to invite Adriana, he replied, embarrassed. Not if you don't mind. Why is that, I wonder? Should I mind? Surprised Wallace Sr., it's your birthday. And if she accepts your invitation, why shouldn't she? Why wouldn't she accept it? For example, she may have some business of her own planned, shrugged John. Or she has a man who won't let go. It's not that big of a deal. Dad, what's the point in guessing? Stephen said reasonably. Our business is to offer. Stephen, you're growing up. Adriana complimented him. Thank you for your kind words. But I think it's to your credit. The student replied with a smile. Adriana, I want to invite you to my birthday party. My birthday. She was surprised. Well, yes, nodded Stephen. No, if you have your own plans or a jealous husband, I understand and will not be offended. I do not have any husband, with a sigh answered Adriana, and immediately scolded and himself. What does he need my private life for? Come on, distrustfully exclaimed the ward, and immediately bought his tongue. That is, I wanted to say everything is normal, assured the tutor, and quite unexpectedly added, I will definitely come. In the evening, taking a bath with her favorite scent of lilac, Adriana indulged in reflection. The young woman did not fully understand what had made her accept her student's invitation. No matter how respectfully the Wallace treated Adriana, she realized that the tutor was just another member of their staff, and she was part of the entourage. But then why on earth would she be invited to a birthday party? And suddenly, Adriana realized this kid, despite his father's 1 million, was hard to call happy. And he was probably very lonely. That was why Stephen had invited Adriana, and she in turn had accepted his invitation for the same reason. To be fair, Adriana did break through a few times, to call and say she couldn't make it. The young woman's hand reached for her cell phone several times, but she never dared to say no. When Adriana told about Stephen's invitation to her friend, the latter splashed her hands. Wow. Yeah, that's really cool. And don't tell me you said no. You realize I didn't. Adriana said mockingly, and you should have. Betty said emphatically. Remember, friend, good for you. Listen, do you know what you're going to wear yet? Adriana said slowly. She had just realized that she hadn't thought about what she was going to wear. What would you do without Aunt Betty? After all, you're going to a party in a rich house, which means you have to dress appropriately. You know, silk, satin, diamonds. Where would I get diamonds? Adriana grinned. But that's just figurative. My point is that you need to be on the level, not to make a mess. You think I don't understand that. Why didn't you think about the outfit? Adriana shrugged her shoulders. I've been so wrapped up. There are still 4 days until my birthday. So I would have thought about an outfit sooner or later. I'd think about an outfit before I blew Betty away. You don't have to think about it. You have to think it through. Oh, you'd say it's a lot of thought. I don't know what I'm gonna do, but no one's gonna pay any attention to me. I'm sure the invited women will be wearing dresses that cost 3 times my salary. But let me disagree, because it's not the dress, it's the woman. But these rich sons will wear their Versus creations. It's not the woman they'll remember, it's the dress. What's the use of a brand name if it fits like a saddle on a cow? Well, as for you, so on you, and a sack of potatoes will look like an exquisite outfit. Well, you just gave a whole lecture. Adriana exclaimed, remembering Wallace Sr., but frankly, I didn't understand what you were trying to say. Never mind. Betty replied cheerfully. Anya, shall we go where? What do you mean? Where? She snorted. To shopping, of course. Where else? Time permitting. I don't feel like it. Adriana shook her head. Oh no. Betty was determined, and when she was determined, her opponent didn't stand a chance. So Adriana let herself be persuaded and ended up with a breathtakingly beautiful silver-colored dress with an open back, a neckline, a window at the chest, and a slit almost to the hip. Just right, Mila said approvingly as she came out of the fitting room. Seductive, but not a hint of vulgarity. Adriana looked at herself critically in the mirror. The dress, of course, sat as flush as if it had been waiting for her, but she thought the outfit was a little too daring. This wasn't a social gathering or New Year's Eve. Adriana, I assure you, all the men's eyes will be on you, assured her knowledgeable friend. And so it was when Adriana entered the banquet hall. The men looked at her with marked interest, and half of the women were overcome with inferiority complexes. Who's that? Christina asked. A socialite and a friend of the celebrant's mother. Is it Stephen's tutor? Answered Kathy, not without envy, thinking what a gorgeous figure she had. And this she hid under loose shrines and closed dresses. Kathy wondered. Silly woman. Wallace's wife was in great shape, thanks to gym yoga, special massages. But this girl's figure was top-notch. Tutor Stephen, and girlfriend. And you're not afraid of what? Of what? Christina's eyes rounded. Yes, you look at her, this lady only in erotic movies to star in and are not afraid that she seduces your son. What is this nonsense? No, it's not nonsense. The woman objected. You remember Oksana Zolotic, don't you? That's the one who after the divorce in Spain left. And she is the same. Nodded Christina. So she and her ex hired an English tutor for her son. And one day Oksana accidentally stumbled upon a racy correspondence in social networking, which their Sam led with the tutor. And guess what? Purely by accident, grinned Kathy. How's that? It seems that the guy did not close the page on Marcelo, the socialite's forehead. I don't remember the details. You don't look at them as educators. Ladies don't get lost. In the end, it turned out that Sam has been sleeping with his tutor for 2 months. Nightmare, Mrs. Wallace shook her head. A nightmare, nodded Christina. And what did the parents do? Mrs. Wallace asked. What about the parents? Parents reported it to the school and law enforcement. Serves them right. And what was it that soothed your heart? The tutor didn't deny the obvious. And then, the court suspended her for 2 years and banned her from teaching for 3 years. Not enough. I'd shamelessly give her more. How bloodthirsty are you? Kathy laughed. Laughingly, but if I were you and John, I'd pay close attention to that lady. I don't know. Kathy shrugged. John says she's a real professional. and I've always trusted his judgment. And if he says so, it must be true. Who can argue with that? Except that professionalism doesn't stop him. Oh, but don't push it. This girl, but did not give away her desire to cut down. She dresses strictly, and Kathy Acer put down half a word. Right in the middle of the hall, Stephen and his teacher danced a medley of tango, waltz, and some other dances. Are you now going to argue that your tutor has no intention of seducing your son? Patronize us that we do, Christina said. Kathy was speechless. What is she doing? She thought angrily. I must say, the duet was just great, and some of the guests began to applaud. And one of Wallace's partners, the famous ladies' man Pavel Zhukov, asked what kind of a beautiful nymph is this? Why? I don't know. John grinned, but he could not know her, for this lady was not of our party. And who is she, this tutor? The kid's got a math problem, and he's applying next year. So I found him this beautiful girl. By the way, Stephen has started to show interest in the Queen of Science. And the main thing is that now it's not so bad, said the Beals. Beautiful, seductive, and smart. Just a treasure. I'd like to get to know her better. Rick, you are in your repertoire. Wallace wagged his finger. Are you charming today? Stephen said playfully, much to the embarrassment of the tutor. Thank you, of course, but you're exaggerating. Not at all, smiled the student. Are you seeing each other right now? Here we go. The dress is brilliant. Adriana laughed. I'm not talking about dresses, I'm talking about you. The young woman could smell the scent of expensive perfume and elite alcohol. Stephen was different now. Alcohol changes a man, she thought. It is not without reason that they say that what is on the mind of a sober man is on the tongue of a drunk. When, to Adriana's great relief, the dance was over, Stephen thanked her and turned away. The tutor took her place at the table, and suddenly she noticed that everyone was looking at her with curiosity. Adriana took a convulsive gulp of champagne, and although the piece did not fit in her throat, she took a bite of the salty tablet. Adriana, can I talk to you for a minute? She heard a voice behind her. The crumbs of the pill stuck mercilessly in her throat, and the young woman ran out. The voice belonged to Mrs. Wallace, whom Adriana was a little afraid of. Besides, it wasn't hard to guess what the conversation was about. It was all about the dance, of course. I hear you, Adriana replied nonchalantly, thinking, after all, I have nothing to fear. It's only a dance. Maybe we should step back, Kathy suggested in a social tone. All right, if you say so. The women went out into the conservatory and Kathy said, Adriana, I won't beat around the bush. You are a very attractive girl, but you are first and foremost a teacher. So I would ask you to behave in a manner befitting a teacher. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, come on. Wallace raised her voice. You know what you're talking about. There's a lot of stories like that out there these days. I just don't know what you're all counting on. Where do you come from? Adriana felt a wave of anger wash over her. Why the hell hadn't she done anything wrong? We'll take it from there. The important thing is not to lose it. Here's the thing. Kathy, I'm sorry. I don't know your middle name. The lady of the house. Just like me, Adriana mentally noted. And she continued with dignity. Well, Kathy, I know what you mean. I just don't understand what the stories you mentioned have to do with me. A guy asked me to dance. It was in front of guests and parents, not in private. So it was just a dance for him, nothing more. Kathy looked thoughtfully at the young woman and thought, she's right. They were nowhere near privacy or anything else for that matter. But her friend's story made it hard to believe that the tutor was not going to get intimate with Stephen. Kathy had seen with her own eyes the tutor smiling at her son. Flirting it looked like. Or was it just a polite smile? Either way, prevention never hurts. So, Adriana, Wallace said firmly, was it a dance or something else? But you were not on your best behavior. I hope it won't happen again. Oh, there was so much Adriana wanted to say to this desirable person. Like the fact that she didn't give a damn about her son. But since it was none of Adriana's business, she remained silent. So the young woman confined herself to apologizing and promising to behave with more restraint. But there was no need for more restraint. After sitting at the table for about 15 minutes, Adriana was going home so soon. John asked in surprise, "But you haven't even tasted the cake, and we invited you." "I'd love to," said the tutor sincerely, "but I don't feel well." "Well, that's a shame." The next day was Saturday, and Adriana allowed herself to wallow in the warmth of her insoles until 11 o'clock to chase away the remnants of sleep. The young woman stretched sweetly and stood up. Adriana started each morning with a glass of water and lemon. She sat at the table and, sipping the unpretentious drink, indulged in thoughts not in vain and doubted whether or not to go to the birthday party. The young woman thought. In essence, nothing terrible happened. But read the moral. Mrs. Wallace, it's okay, isn't it? Kathy had behaved as any other mother in her position would have behaved. Besides, Wallace was right that there really are a lot of liberated teachers out there. And Adriana didn't know what was on her mind. But why does it feel so dirty? Simply because it's unpleasant. The young woman's thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of a cell phone. Looking at the display, she raised her eyebrows in bewilderment. Robert, the one who was not expected. I wonder what he wants. It seemed that everything had been said to each other. At first, Adriana didn't want to answer, but curiosity got the better of her. "Hello," she answered expressionlessly. "Adriana, how is your precious?" In a cheerful voice, the ex-brother-in-law asked. "With your prayers?" The young woman said in the same fearless voice. "Why so unkind?" "Robert, what did you want?" Adriana decided not to stand on ceremony. "Me, you, and you," she answered impatiently. "But me. Robert, I really don't have time to talk to you." Adriana sighed. "If you have something to say, say it. If not, let's say goodbye." "Have you changed?" Robert noticed. "Was he a good teacher?" She argued. "Are you done?" "Adriana, let's start over." He said. "Did you think long?" The ex-lover asked ironically. "Yes," he admitted. "In the end, I thought about it and decided that I want to be with you. And if that's what you want, it's for the baby's sake." "If that's what I want," Adriana laughed. "Are you doing me a favor?" "But why a favor?" "Because that's what you're all about." "Robert, I really don't have time to talk to you. Bye for now." After talking to her ex, Adriana's throat was suddenly dry. She drained her water and had no time to catch her breath when the phone rang again. "I told you I don't have time," roared Adriana and disconnected. The young woman fidgeted with the phone and looked at the screen and saw that Betty Mill had called. "Sorry, I just didn't look at the display," Adriana repented. "Yeah, I realized that," grinned her friend. "Though at first I thought you'd confessed. You're in a different circle now." "I guess so," she grinned wryly. That's what Betty guessed. "I see the party didn't go well. It might have been for some people, but it wasn't for me." Adriana sighed. "Did something happen?" "Not exactly, but don't say anything else," Betty cut her off. "I'm coming to see you this afternoon. We'll treat you." The friendly ambulance arrived at exactly 300 hours. Betty showed up with a rather impressive cake and 2 bottles of wine. "Wow!" Adriana exclaimed as she accepted the gifts. "Are we really going to sit down to all this? I can't vouch for the cake, but we'll have plenty of wine." He winked at his friend. "So tell me." Actually, Stephen, unlike most of his peers, could drink and never got drunk. He was down to the norm, and that's it. But on his 16th birthday, the kid had a blast. It all started with a glass of Spanish wine and ended with whiskey. Or was it tequila? Whatever. The birthday boy had mixed everything that could be mixed, and now he was paying the price. With a massive headache and a dry mouth. Oh, he crawled off the bed. Standing up from the floor, the boy felt like he was about to fall. Stephen sat down in a chair and, passing the no-nonsense dizziness, walked to the kitchen. "What head hurts?" With sympathy asked his father, sipping strong coffee. There is such a thing, nodded Stephen. Drink kefir, it'll help. And then some aspirin, John suggested. I will. And then I think I'll argue some more. That's right, approvingly said Wallace Sr., watching his son pouring kefir. What I wanted to ask, why did our tutor leave so quickly? I have no idea, Stephen grumbled. We were dancing with her. Then she and my mom went to the conservatory for something. And that was it. That's about it, Dad muttered. Well, I see. What's the matter? Stephen asked, perplexed. No, it's nothing. I was just asking. She told me she didn't feel well. But maybe she did. Wallace Jr. shrugged and bypassed the kefir in one fell swoop. I'll go underground some more. After taking an aspirin tablet, Stephen went to bed. But the sleep was gone. And really, why did she leave? The guy wondered. I didn't do anything to hurt her, unless her mom said something to her. Stephen sighed. His relationship with his father was more trusting than with his mother. And it wasn't just that two men would understand each other better than a woman or women would understand them. The boy guessed that by and large Kathy had given birth to him for propriety, that is to say, to make it like everyone else's husband, wife, and kinder. It wasn't a very pleasant realization, but that's just the way it was. His mother took almost no part in Stephen's upbringing, which, however, did not bother him at all. His father was much better at it. So what the hell is Mom doing with Adriana? And what the hell did Mom say to her? But she couldn't suddenly feel sick 10 minutes after dancing so hard. Or maybe they were too incendiary. That thought cheered Stephen up. She's not a bad dancer, the guy thought. And remembering how he had spun the spit and pressed Adriana against him, he suddenly felt no, this is too much. However, the racy thoughts that Stephen hid even from himself were so persistent that the guy gave in. The fantasy went off the scale, and it took a lot of effort to subdue it. We have a purely business relationship, he whispered like a mantra. She tutors me. I tutor her. She tutors me. I tutor her, and nothing more. We have a purely business relationship. The frank visions finally receded, and Stephen fell asleep. But what was so terrible? Betty wondered. Personally, I don't see anything wrong with dancing, but for some people it's something out of the ordinary. And you just ran away. I was so embarrassed, I could have fallen to the ground. Well, you shouldn't have. By the way, by running away, you gave that lady reason to think you were thinking something like that. But think about it. Adriana wanted to say something, but she just froze with her mouth open. Betty's right. But on the other hand, it was too much for her to be in there. And she had a class with Stephen on Monday. What are we supposed to do now? You don't. A friend chuckled. It was only then that Adriana realized she'd said the question out loud. After all, you haven't done anything criminal. And if this Kathy thinks otherwise, that's her problem. By the way, everyone judges according to their own depravity. Well, there's something to that. Hee. Adriana. By the end of the first bottle, it didn't seem so terrible. Adriana really hadn't done anything she should be blushing about. So she had every right to walk into her employer's house with her head held high. As the afternoon turned to evening, Betty suggested karaoke. Let's go out. You didn't have a good time last night, so why not continue the party? The karaoke bar was not far from the neighbor's yard, so her friend's idea was well received. Betty and Adriana sang a lot of songs and then went home in a great mood. And on Sunday morning, the Wallace Hare's tutor forgot about any residue on her soul. And on Monday, no matter how hard Adriana tried to put an independent expression on her face, she could hardly manage it. When the young woman entered the Wallace house, she was confronted by the rich man's wife. Kathy could clearly sense the mood of her son's tutor. A look of satisfaction flashed across the woman's face. "Hello, Kathy." Adriana greeted the lady of the house, and her voice trembled. "Hello." Kathy replied arrogantly, and tapping the high heels of her suede boots, walked out of the mansion, leaving behind Corky and a trail of French perfume. Stephen behaved as if nothing had happened, but Adriana sensed, faintly, a change in his demeanor. The young woman did not understand what it was, but had no doubt that it had taken place. Besides, it seemed to Adriana that the apprentice wanted to tell her something. She could even guess what it was, and it made her uncomfortable. "Adriana, can I ask you a question?" "Yes, of course. Why did you leave my birthday party?" Adriana suddenly became agitated. What was that about? She thought. But pulling herself together, she answered, "Stephen, it's nothing. I just didn't feel well." "You sure?" Wallace Jr. asked incredulously. "It's just that you and I were dancing like that. And I thought, what, did somebody hurt you or something?" "That's quite an audience." Stephen smiled awkwardly, and Adriana thought for the umpteenth time that her student was not the happiest person in the world. And those who say that money isn't what makes you happy are right. Though being rich is certainly more comfortable than being poor. It depends. "No, it's all right. Trying to appear wealthy," replied the tutor. "No one has offended me. Everything is fine." Already on the bus, Adriana thought that she had not lied to her tutor. She really wasn't offended, because if she were Alina, she would probably have done the same thing. Stephen, meanwhile, was thinking about his tutor. When Adriana came to class, she was wearing a strict black pantsuit. Yes, except that she saw silver dresses, which opened expressively in the windows, that is, the back and the exact leg. And what a graceful waist. Stephen remembered how he had felt through the thin fabric of the dress, the warmth of her skin, and he was thrown into a fever. No, something must be done about it. Panic, the boy thought. Stephen tried to remember the shortcomings of his tutor, and to his dismay, found none. Except that height didn't work out. But is it such a disadvantage when otherwise the figure is super? "No," stated Stephen. "And it seems, it's not just attraction, it's love." "What's new?" asked Kathy, the brown hairdresser. The woman's name was actually Christina, but the hairdresser for all the city's elite preferred to be called Tina. "That's okay," Ms. Wallace shrugged. "Recently celebrated the 16th birthday of Christina's son. That's all the news. Christina came to see me the other day," Tina said meaningfully, and Kathy realized what the hairdresser was expecting from her. Oh, that Christina. Always in her repertoire. Kathy loved her best friend very much, but she couldn't help but notice one flaw in her. Christina couldn't keep her mouth shut, and she liked to exaggerate. So, Kathy decided not to live up to the expectations of a nosy hairdresser. At least not to begin with. But she didn't like to make a big deal out of it, especially since there was nothing to make a big deal out of. "But she told me a wild story." "A wild story," laughed Wallace. "Oh, mercy, what a wild story." "She said that your son's tutor showed up at his birthday party half naked, and they danced an obscene dance," Tina said in such a tragic voice, and made such terrible eyes that Kathy laughed even harder. "But they did dance," said Wallace, miffed. "But I didn't see anything indecent, just a regular dance medley. And the dress was within the bounds of propriety. Perhaps such a dance for a teacher and a schoolboy is too familiar, but it was far from indecent. But I still gave the tutor a preventive talk." "Good for you," exclaimed the hairdresser of the United States. "It's better to overdo it than underdo it." Kathy, Christina go on friends for a long time. No. And it occurred to her that her friends complement each other. One not overly talkative, the other curious to the point of obscenity. "Exactly," Kathy said, making it clear that she had no desire to talk about the subject. "Tell me, how is France faring?" Kathy asked. The day before yesterday, Tina flew in from Paris, where there was an international conference, which was attended by the whole top of the beauty industry. Alina was much more interested in it. "What's she going to do?" hummed Tina, disappointed that they wouldn't hear anything interesting. "Worth, what's up with the sales? There's a fur coat sale that week, and you're silent as a partisan," Mrs. Wallace exclaimed. "Where?" Kathy drove her trusty BMW, and thought that it would be good to talk to her husband to fly to Paris for a week. Blago they had a small, but very beautiful and cozy mansion with an attic. Sail Abroad is not a gathering of wild-eyed Russian women in local boutiques, which, in fact, to call them such could only with a great stretch. Paris or Milan is another matter. It's settled, Kathy thought with a satisfied smile. I'll ask Wallace to go to Paris. If he doesn't want to, I'll fly alone. I'll give myself a fur coat for New Year's Eve. At the same time, and buy an evening dress. Before New Year's Eve, they have a great selection of dresses, tapes. Yes, I would love to, regretfully divorced husband. But that week I have an urgent business trip, so you'll have to fly without me. Well, I'll fly without you, Kathy replied with feigned sadness. To tell the truth, the Wallace couple had rarely traveled together in the last few years, but they were both playing nice. John guessed that his wife was not bored of spending time without him. Kathy, in turn, knew that her husband was not without sin. Both were satisfied with everything, so there were no jealousy scenes. The main thing is not to forget to brighten the sad face about the fact that the other half cannot join. It just so happened that the Wallace couple departed on the same day. Look, behave yourself, they told Stephen. He jokingly saluted them to dress. Keep warm and don't try to eat dry. Kathy threatened with a dainty finger, and the parents left the house. The school was quarantined, and Stephen, having seen his parents off, fell into a warm bed. Adriana should be home by 2 o'clock to finish her nap, so he can sleep until noon. Adriana. The other day, Stephen's buddy David and tutor stopped by. Just as the new girl was leaving, the guy winked. Stephen was overcome with a strange feeling. Funny, but at that moment he felt that the beautiful tutor was really his girlfriend. He also wished she wasn't. No, Wallace Jr. was forced to answer. That's my math tutor. Wow. The prize whistled Buddy. And my tutor. She's a 45-year-old woman weighing a pound and swiping everything without looking. Stephen laughed. For what purpose? Wallace, have you lost your mind? David grinned. Don't you get it? It's a sin not to hook up with such a girl. Wait, so you could hook up with a tutor? Why not? Isn't a tutor a woman? A woman, of course, Stephen mumbled, but she's smarter than that. However, Adriana in her silver dress reappeared in front of his eyes. Wallace Jr.'s fingers felt the warmth of her skin, as if it were his, making him throw a fever again. Now in a semi-drama, Stephen let his dreams expand beyond his wildest dreams. But this time the boy didn't think to quell them. Stephen, what are you thinking? Adriana asked, and the millionaire hair finally woke up. This is the 5th time I've asked you a question and you can't hear me. Sorry, I was thinking, Stephen said embarrassed. If Adriana knew what he was thinking about. It's okay, it happens, the tutor replied condescendingly. Aha, said the student absent-mindedly. And suddenly, without fully realizing what he was doing, he kissed her. Stephen, what are you doing? The young woman marveled, pulling out of his embrace. I'm Adriana, he whispered. I love you. Adriana looked at her watch and sighed heavily. 3rd hour of the night, and she still hadn't poked her eyes open. The young woman replayed what had happened in her head for the umpteenth time and wondered to herself, how did I do this? Adriana knew one thing: she was an educator, Stephen a mentee. That was the way it should have been done. But you don't fight when you fight when you fight. Adriana didn't condemn teachers and tutors who got close to their students, but she didn't approve of their behavior. And now she was one of them. We're like Romeo and Juliet, Stephen whispered, to which Adriana only grinned. I'm not Juliet. I'm getting old. Don't say so. You are the youngest, the most beautiful. Remembering this dialogue, she felt Juliet blushing. Catherine, aye. Then, and what to do now? She thought in despair. One thing is clear: Adriana will no longer work with the Wallace hair. We can, of course, pretend that nothing happened. But how will Stephen behave? What about Stephen? Adriana hummed to herself. He's a smart guy. I'm sure he understands the situation correctly. It was just a passing weakness, and that's all. The young woman calmed down, but then suddenly began to sort things out. Something was bothering her, but what was it? And when Adriana realized it, she became completely despondent. After all, Stephen had told her about love. But was it love? He knew better, of course. But the teacher suspected that it was a typical teenage hormonal outburst, and now she'd committed an ethical breach. Tomorrow, she would tell Stephen to stop cooperating. With that thought, Adriana fell asleep. The young woman walked to school as if in a dream. She had only slept for 2 o'clock, so she did some work. "Adriana, are you not feeling well?" The vice principal asked sympathetically. "I'm not well. I'm disgusted. I'm the worst. And all because I was no better than a teacher who has relationships with underage students." I wanted to yell back, but Adriana limited herself to a short answer, "No, it's okay." The young woman didn't remember how she'd gotten home. She still had to go to Stephen's class. Although, in fact, what's to stop her from calling and saying she won't be coming again? "I didn't hire you," Stephen pointed out. "So what do we do?" Adriana asked with a sigh. "Wait for my father to arrive. And he would be here in a week." "A week," Adriana repeated disappointedly. "Yes, in a week," Stephen confirmed. For a second, the young woman had the thought of telling her mentee that she wasn't feeling well. Yes, as a matter of fact, she was. Adriana had not slept well. She had a headache, and the drive to the cottage village 15 kilometers from the city was an ordeal. However, despite the mess in her head, Adriana realized in time how she would look in her student's eyes, like an ostrich hiding its head in the sand. "I see," the young woman muttered. "Well, I'll be in at 3 then." "Okay." Stephen acted as if nothing had happened, for which Adriana was very grateful. Toward the end of the class, however, the boy said, "Does that blouse look good on you?" "Thank you," Adriana nodded. "It emphasizes the beauty of your figure," he added with a meaningful look. "Yeah." The tutor nodded again. "Yes, I think I'll go. But what if I don't let go? What if I shout? No one will hear." Stephen grinned, putting his arm around her waist. "Stephen, relax. You already with dignity," answered the guy, and added no, so no. Stephen understood perfectly well that Adriana was uncomfortable. Of course, he had heard many stories about teachers and students, but he realized that his tutor was not one of those. Well, is Stephen willing to wait as long as it takes? The boy realized more and more clearly, no, this is not an affair. Stephen no longer hinted to the tutor about what was between them, but he does not intend to give up his feelings. "In a month. Are you not satisfied with the salary?" Wallace Sr. asked in surprise. "Or did someone offer you more?" "That's not a problem. I can pay you more. Just name the amount." "No," Adriana shook her head. "It's just a family emergency." "Well, I'm sorry," John said with genuine regret. "It's been a pleasure working with you." "Likewise," Adriana said, feeling like an asshole. Stephen's parents had returned safely from their trips, and Adriana had not told her employer that she planned to stop working with him, because Stephen was behaving as if nothing had happened, and she saw no reason to do so. The classes continued. The incident was slowly being hammered out, but a couple days before the conversation with Wallace Sr., Adriana began to feel ill right in class. "You look pale," Betty remarked. The friends were drinking coffee in the teacher's lounge, and Adriana glanced at her watch every 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes felt like an eternity. "Yeah, I don't feel well," she nodded. "Nauseous. Dizzy. Must be getting sick. They say there's a virus going around right now," Betty nodded. "So I'm sorry, friend, but I'm gonna stay away from you." "What's there to apologize for?" Adriana said in a weak voice. "How many more classes do you have?" 3 more. Mila shook her head. "Well, why don't you wake up? You're not wearing your face. Go to the clinic and get a sick leave." "Yeah, I guess I'll do that." After listening to Adriana, The therapist said you're not the one to see. Who is? I have something serious. But whether it's serious or not is for you to judge. The doctor smirked. And I, for my part, refer you to a gynecologist. To tell the truth, the question was asked out of inertia. Adriana understood everything, but refused to believe it. The gynecologist's voice sounded like the rolls of thunder. Congratulations. You're pregnant. About 5 weeks. Is she kidding? Adriana thought angrily. Though how would she know that a tutor could be pregnant by her student? That's a load of crap. Are you sure? Idly she asked. The gynecologist smiled confidently. So run along and enjoy it. Thank you. You are a man, smiled Adriana. That same day, she informed John that she could no longer practice with his son. When Adriana got home, everything was falling out of her hands. The coffee had run off. The reaper had flooded, and when she poured water into the bathroom, she nearly flooded the neighbors. Damn it, the young woman shouted in her heart. The cell phone rang. When she saw Robert's number on the display, which Adriana had never bothered to delete and blacklist, she giggled hysterically. Lately, her ex had suddenly started attacking her with calls. A couple of times in the driveway and one near the school. Adriana needed him like a fish needs an umbrella. But right now, Robert's call came in handy. That's who she's going to get off on. Hello, beautiful. The ex-lover said hello cheerfully. Hi. Cole. No kidding, replied Adriana. And what the hell do we need? Why the hell? Robert was clearly in a complacent state, and this particularly aggravated the young woman. Who else? She's on a roll. What do you want from me? I told you when I said it was over between us. Why did you do that? Then Adriana cut her off. That's it, Robert. Love is long gone. The tomatoes are wilted. Our shoes are too tight, and we're not going back. Xiao. On the quarrel, Robert had no choice but to pass out, and Adriana collapsed on the bed and sobbed bitterly at Riva. She felt much better and needed someone to talk to. Mom, despite their trusting relationship, wasn't the right person for that. That left Betty. Honey, I'm not distracting you, she asked. Did something happen to you? Yes, Adriana said quietly, with a sigh. Wallace again. Well, you could say that. Did you go to the clinic? I did. A young woman took my sobs away, and they told me you'd been diagnosed with something serious. Scared Betty. Betty. I'm pregnant, Adriana replied. And I let the tears flow again. Pregnant with Robert. What Robert with Stephen? Oh my God. How the hell did you get pregnant? I don't know. Overwhelmed, Adriana said, smearing tears down her cheeks simply. But it just happened. Yeah, Adriana, you're a real handful. Betty sounded shocked, which is not surprising. What do you teach me, girl? What to do? You think? I don't know. I wanted a baby so badly. And now you're having one. My friend exclaimed. What's the problem? Does it matter who the father is? For yourself. Go ahead and live your life in peace. And what will the school say? Adriana, fear God. You're already 32. Who cares what anyone says? No one really cares. Golikova's mom's Fang, who teaches KHL, comes in a Jeep. And she's married, by the way. Money is not enough for her. And you have nothing to be ashamed of. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. Yeah, she sighed. Adriana, you know how you said Robert was on the horizon again. Well, I did, so what? But I just thought maybe I shouldn't push him away. Well, the man's cute, no matter what. What's your point? Because he could be the father of your baby. Did you think long and hard about it? Adriana asked. He didn't want his own child. And you're suggesting we force someone else's on him. You don't say. You say that he's being persistent and that he seems to agree to the child. Maybe, maybe not. She cut him off. How could you even think that? Well, maybe you're right. But maybe Robert really has changed. It's a long story, but it's hard to believe. But it's up to you, Milo chuckled. But I wouldn't throw it around if I were you. It's not like Wallace Jr. is going to raise your kinder. That's the last thing on my mind, Adriana assured him. In fact, I walked out on them, and I explained it somehow. I said I wanted to terminate my employment for family reasons, and I didn't cover my soul. Betty summed it up. Exactly. Okay, Betty, I'm gonna go take a bath. I already tried that today, but I failed miserably. I almost flooded the neighbors, but now that I talked to you, I feel better. Well, what are best friends for? With a smile asked faithful friend. Go take your bath, and don't worry. You know I'll always help you. I know, said Adriana gratefully. Lying in the warm, fragrant bath, she thought how nice it was to have a friend like Betty. Someone who would be willing to help her, if not help her, at least listen to her at any time of the day or night. Always acted on Adriana like a breath of fresh air or a balm on the soul. And this is something not everyone can boast of. Maternity leave became for Adriana that fertile period when you can do nothing and enjoy life. The future mother took a lot of walks, loved classical music, ballet, and began to visit exhibitions. And now Adriana, having enjoyed the works of a young, and according to rumors, fashionable artist, decided to take a walk in the park and eat ice cream. To you, as always, asked the ice cream seller with a smile. During her pregnancy, Adriana could no longer imagine her existence without this treat. From time to time, the woman bought new products, but her greatest love was still vanilla ice cream on a stick. It was delicious. Adriana could eat it every day. Yes, I'll have a scone, she smiled. In response, Adriana took the ice cream and sat down on a bench nearby. As she downed the ice cream, she blissfully froze her eyes and stroked her belly. Adriana, wow, she thought she'd forgotten that voice. Adriana slowly opened her eyes and saw Stephen. He hadn't changed a bit in the 6 months they hadn't seen each other, except for his hair. Hello, he said with a smile. Hello, Stephen, she replied discreetly. How are you? Asked the guy, looking carefully at Adriana's stomach. Fine, thank you. And you? I'm fine too. He nodded. Applied for the department. Hospitality business. Good for you. Praised the former tutor and smiled strainedly. So the lessons were not wasted. So, Wallace Jr. nodded with a smile, keeping his eyes on her belly. He's figured it out. Adriana thought desperately. Adriana, did you get married? Stephen asked hesitantly. Yes. After a little silence, she answered. Well, good luck, said the guy, his face changing. It was good to see a mutually successful entry. Stephen was sure that this child was his. Of course, theoretically Adriana could have gotten pregnant by another man, but he was sure that was not the case. And it wasn't just her saying she was single. As if an unmarried person couldn't get pregnant. Wallace Jr. could make a great psychologist if he wanted to, if the tutor had another man. There'd hardly be anything between them. The woman in the relationship would have molded Stephen with a ringing slap, or at the very least read a rant. After all, Adriana could have said that she had a loved one to whom she was faithful, and Stephen would not have insisted. He was a man of low tide in general, and male solidarity was not an empty word to Wallace Jr., so everything was leading up to the fact that he, Stephen, would soon be a father. The party at the invitation-only private nightclub was in full swing. She just took off without saying anything, you know, to the savvy hair 1 million Wallace, to David's friend under his 4th glass of stiff cocktail. Yeah, I understand, he assured her. Well, what did you expect? It's a delicate situation. What if your parents had gotten to it? Well, David certainly had a point. But first, real feelings. What was Stephen sure of? It is such a situation is perceived painfully, and all reasonable arguments are useless. And then, continued his buddy, his exhortations, your relationship has no future. Yes, and your former teacher made it clear that she does not need them. She realizes, probably, that not our circle. David wanted to say something else, But Stephen didn't give him the chance. He grabbed his friend by the chest and threateningly said, "What did you say? Come on, say it again." "Stephen, don't be stupid." David tried to get free, but it was not to be. Wallace Jr. clutched his club jacket even tighter and said, "I'm gonna give you a good one. She's 100 times better than those silicone chickens." "Stephen." "Yeah, I'm not arguing." But it's like the guy didn't hear him. "Come on, let's go outside and talk. I don't care if you're a man or not." "Oh, don't do that. Vasil is good." He intervened in their quarrel. "David didn't say anything like that. I'll see you now." Stephen got up from the table, but he couldn't keep his feet. The heir to the 1 million fell right onto the table, knocking over all the dishes. "That asshole ruined the party," someone said. "What happened?" asked the receptionist Kelly, whom the guys knew well. "Get out of here, you chicken." Stephen's got a temper. "You weren't even close to her, young man. We pay for the battles, the dishes," strictly said the girl, not paying attention to the insults. She knew this young man perfectly well and did not understand what fly bit him. Usually the son of the owner of a chain of hotels and pleasure boat parks behaved correctly and left generous tips. He must have had an accident, the receptionist thought. However, that didn't mean that broken glasses and plates, not to mention workplace insults, were the norm. "No, if you smoke, you'd better answer for it." "No way," shouted Stephen in the face of the administrator. For extra convincing Nasanov Figo right under the girl's nose. "Kelly, I'm sorry," David said quietly. "The frame is just a problem. So I drank more than usual." The girl quit. "I'll pay for it now." "Thank you," smiled gratefully at Kelly. "Shall I call him a cab?" "Yes, be my guest." The receptionist stepped away from the table, and the guys began to calm the rambunctious Romeo. "Wallace, sit down," Mishka said, trying to get his buddy onto the leather couch. Stephen obeyed, while the waitress cleaned up the mess. He mumbled something to himself, glancing at the girl. The cab pulled up, the receptionist announced, and the guys picked Stephen up and led him to the exit. "I'm not going anywhere." Wallace Jr. protested as the boys led him to the car. "Stephen, come on." David persuaded him. "The steak has wandered, and it will. She kept it from me that she was pregnant." Stephen persisted. "Adriana hid my child from me." The friends noticed with annoyance that a crowd of gawkers had gathered near them, which was to be expected. Some were already filming the scene. "My tutor is pregnant by me and tried to hide it," Wallace proclaimed to the cab driver. "Come on, get in," the driver grinned. "Is the meter running?" "I don't give a damn," Stephen said carelessly, getting into the car. "Do you even know who I am?" "I'm Wallace, and I can buy all of you outright." "Yeah," nodded the cab driver and thought, "Sure, you can in about 10 years. Right now, your rich daddy's paying for all your fun." But he didn't say anything out loud. After all, the customer, as you know, is always right. Stephen dozed off on the road, and when they got to the Wallace mansion and the driver was pushing him, he started looking around in bewilderment. "How did I get here?" Stephen asked the cabbie. "How?" The cab driver grinned. "How else did your friends call a cab? You can pay by card. Unless it's a money order." "All right with a transfer," Wallace Jr. nodded, noting that it was starting to get light outside. He patted his pockets. His cell phone was in the pocket of his jean jacket. "Speak. Put your cell phone number in your teeth," Stephen said. The cab driver dictated the number, and the guy, swearing to himself, hit the wrong digits. He managed to move the money only on the third attempt. After that, Stephen got out of the mansion's overturned cork and flew to his room. John Wallace was furious. He rarely surfed social media, but this time it was as if he could sense the posts and videos of inappropriate behavior. Their only offspring was murdered by hotel and boat owners. The commentators were on fire. "These majors are completely crazy. They think they can do anything." A young girl was indignant. "Their parents have no time to educate them," replied an older woman. That's the result. Both comments gain more than 300 likes. I wonder if what he said about tutoring is true, wrote another commenter. By the way, there were some who condemned Adriana, but strangely enough, they turned out to be not so many. Mostly everyone was cursing Stephen and his parents. What can be said? The masses did not pity the rich. What does he think he's doing? Growled the head of the family. I would ask another question, Kathy grinned. What does she allow herself? I mean allowed. By the way, her leaving immediately seems suspicious to me, but the former tutor has yet to be dealt with, replied the husband. But our son behaved simply unacceptable. And what came over him? Well, you heard everything yourself. Kathy shrugged with a grin. I wonder if she's really pregnant with our son. And if so, how did it become known? Ramke? Who knows? John said thoughtfully. He must have found out by accident. Maybe he saw her somewhere on the street, and there is already a pose on the nose. It's been a while since she left. And if it was the tutor who gave up the lessons in order to date Stephen with impunity, suggested Kathy. Anything could be, nodded the husband. Besides, I'm not ruling out another possibility. The child may not be from the race, but he may or may not be from the race. The loud facts of the relationship between them are in evidence, the spouse noted, which means the tutor needs to be punished. And how do you not tell her? John grinned. Are you familiar with the law? Or do you have on your mind only clothes and loud salons? It's 16. And that means that our former tutor doesn't fall under Article 134. Who cares? Kathy exclaimed. She's clearly got our boy's head up her ass. And the bottom line is what we have. Wallace looked at his wife and shook his head. And the boys. She's worried about ruining her reputation. That's all. This is no time for recriminations, though. Not hot, said John. In any case, this situation needs to be dealt with. Anyway, I know everything and will take appropriate measures. What do you say? Adriana also saw these posts and was shocked, to say the least. In addition, the young woman was afraid that it would become known at school. I don't know what kind of Adriana he was talking about. Betty shrugged. Your name wasn't mentioned. Betty, think about it. How many tutors named Adriana have tutored your son in math? Yes, and all those socialites at Stephen's birthday party will know who he was talking about. Son of a bitch, swearing at Betty. Who told him to say that? And come on, Adriana waved her hand. He's just a teenager. What's he got to do with it? Whereas I'm a grown woman. Don't beat yourself up, her friend said, taking her hand in hers. You're having a baby, and that's the most important thing. That's the most important thing. And everything else will work out somehow. The friends sat in the park on Adriana's favorite bench closer to the ice cream stand. The saleswoman, looking at them, thought that female friendship, no matter what they say, still exists. She nodded encouragingly to the young women, and sweetly intercepting her gaze, winked and asked Adriana, well, on plumber, Cheku, on plumber, Cheku. Resolutely answered the mother-to-be. To find the former tutor's son, Wallace Sr. did not have much difficulty. True, he did not catch Adriana at home, but even that was not a big problem. She's probably in the park, said the thin old woman in the colorful sundress with a smile. She goes there every day. And that's right, she's expecting a baby. It's good for her. Oh, and who are you? I'm from work. The businessman smiled charmingly. So she's walking in the park, son. While John was thinking whether to go to the park or to wait for Adriana on the bench, a young woman approached the house in the company of a spectacular blonde in a tank top and shorts. I guess my assumption of a chance encounter was correct. Wallace grinned to himself, looking at the impressive belly, a former tutor to his only heir. Bye, dear, said the blonde. After that, the ladies lost their meters. Take care. Good night, replied Adriana, and taking a wide-keyed sundress out of her pocket, headed for the entrance. Adriana, a young woman could hear you. The voice of her former employer, and her heart pounded as if she were competing in a running race. So he saw the empty rollers too. Adriana guessed, and trying to appear calm, answered, "Hello, John. Yes, of course, I'm listening to you. I think you understand why I came to see you," he said. She saw no point in pretending, so she nodded. "Yes, I do. But I assure you—" "Don't do that," Wallace interrupted, raising his right hand. "You don't have to assure me of anything. Just answer me one question. Did anything happen between you and my son? I realize, of course, that the child you are expecting may not be Stephen's. However, his behavior indicates that the situation did not arise out of nothing. So what's your answer?" Adriana was silent. She was more ashamed than ever in her life. "I don't advise you to cheat," John added with a sigh, "because my son and I have no secrets from each other. Even if Stephen does not decide to confess soon, sooner or later he will." The young woman was ready to confess everything, but she couldn't say a word out of excitement. "Adriana, yes, John," she said in one breath. But it was only once. Well, should the child say it or not? Feverishly thought, and Adriana. Oh, how great was the temptation to keep silent. But as she did not like reticence, she decided to confess it to her. After all, Adriana had not demanded any money from them, nor did she intend to. As for Stephen, it would pass. The guy will forget her, fall in love with some girl, or parents will find a bride from their party, and everything will go back to normal. And the baby. Adriana nodded. "But you don't have to worry about that." "I'm not claiming anything." "I guess," nodded the businessman with a thoughtful expression. "But that's not the point. The guy seems to have lost his mind. What do we do?" "I don't know. But I know you have to leave, Adriana," said Wallace Sr., as if it were a little thing like a drink of water. "And where am I supposed to go?" Stunned, said the young woman. "Where do you want to go?" Spread his hands, John. "Even in the capital. I quite seriously want to offer you a very favorable deal." He took a breath and continued, "I buy you an apartment in any city you want. And after the baby is born, I'll help you with employment. What is required of me?" Adriana asked, remembering that this was a transaction. "It's nothing." The businessman smiled. "My son knows nothing about you. Actually, it sounded like fun. After those posts and videos online, she didn't want to stay in this town." Adriana was already thinking about renting out her apartment and moving to her parents' house in the country. And here was such a great opportunity to start a new life. Just her and the baby. And yet Adriana had her doubts. What if Stephen wants to find me? She asked a reasonable question. "But if you don't tell him where you are, he won't find you, will he?" John grinned, and so, as they say, out of sight, out of mind. He saw that the proposal is kind of interested in tutoring, but she still has doubts. So it is necessary to find such arguments so that they do not remain. And he seems to have found one. "Adriana, note that I didn't report it to the agency," Wallace said. "I don't really need to. Besides, I could have used all my connections to make sure you weren't even hired to scrub floors at a school in the neighborhood. Then again, there's the possibility that this story would become known throughout the city and you'd start to be recognized by sight. Still, I need to think about it," Adriana muttered. "Sure," nodded the businessman. "Here's my card in case you deleted my number. Don't you dare delay me any longer." But so thought the young woman as she walked up to the apartment. "As recently as yesterday, I was thinking of leaving myself. And today, when I'm offered an apartment anywhere in Russia, I hesitate." "Anyone would," Betty remarked, when Adriana called her to tell her about Mr. Wallace's offer. "There's only free cheese in a mousetrap." "Well, not really free, but it's too easy a condition. He'd do anything for his son. Right now, he's just trying to get the kid to forget you. And an apartment seems like a reasonable price to pay. But what's an apartment to a man who has mansions all over the world? And then, deep down, he's willing to help his grandson." "You think so?" "Yes, I'm sure of it." The confidence of the force was not in vain. At this time, John Wallace was driving home and thinking that in case of Adriana's consent, he would kill two birds with one stone. He would help his son to forget the woman whose love for him would lead to nothing good, and at the same time, he would help to improve the living conditions of his future grandson. "I'll miss you," Betty sobbed, seeing her friend off on the train. "Oh, I can't," laughed Adriana, even though she wanted to cry too. "It feels like I'm not leaving for a neighboring town, but for another country. Though I'll miss our heart-to-heart conversations on the phone too." It's not that tears did appear in her eyes, and in a second her friends were already sobbing, hugging each other. Coming through, coming through." The conductor hurried up. "What do you have?" The friends said with glee and, waving their hands, laughed through their tears. After the incident in the club, Stephen decided not to take alcohol in his mouth under any circumstances. Watching the video, the guy saw himself from the outside, and it was a disgusting sight. In addition, he elementary set up Adriana. Certainly Mum's girlfriend's ball also will not miss their own. So he should explain himself to his former tutor and apologize to her. Stephen did not know where she lived and realized that his father was unlikely to give him the address. There was a serious conversation between father and son, and John made it clear that he would not approve of a relationship with the tutor, so something had to be done. Stephen went to the website of the tutoring agency where Adriana worked, hoping to find a lead. He almost howled in disappointment when Adriana's profile was deleted. "Damn it," he said out loud. Had his father done this? Stephen didn't want to believe it, but how else to explain the absence of her profile? And then it hit him. He knew his ex-tutor worked at School 26. "So what am I waiting for?" thought Wallace Jr. and laughed with relief. School 26 was almost in the center of town, and getting there from the cottage community was no problem. But would Stephen be given the address? Especially since it was summer, and it was not certain that he would find anyone there. But there were no other options, so we'll make do with what we've got. "Hello," greeted the janitor politely. "Hello," with dignity replied an elderly woman with a high purple hairstyle. An elderly woman with a high purple-colored hairstyle answered with dignity. "Can you please tell me if I can find a female employee of this school?" The janitor frowned, and Stephen began to fantasize on the fly. "You see, an acquaintance wrote me an address, and I lost it. Besides, I recently changed my cell phone, and all the numbers are still in the old one. I don't know." The old woman shook her head, looking at him intently. "In general, no one gives the addresses of employees. Circumstances vary, of course, but mostly they don't give them. But maybe I'll get lucky." Stephen smiled. "Everything can be." The janitor shrugged her shoulders, and seeing a woman in a bright yellow dress, Lisa turned to her. "It's for you, and another employee. And social media for what?" hummed the woman. "So the profile is closed," spread his hands Wallace Jr. "And who do you want?" Lisa asked. "I need Adriana. She first went on maternity leave, and then quit. I think it was due to a move to another city. I don't remember exactly." "In connection with the move to another city," shocked, said Stephen. "Exactly. You didn't know?" "No," I shook my head. "We just lost sight of each other for a long time. What am I really explaining?" Stephen thought, and apologizing, left the school building. The boy walked and thought that this was clearly his father's doing, and something told him it was. The father was determined, and who knows what the father would do if Stephen found Adriana. Certainly not good, and especially not for her. So wouldn't it be easier to just leave it alone? It's been 10 years. 2 years ago, Wallace Sr. left this world. Alas, cancer spares no one. Stephen inherited all the assets as planned. He took over the firm, and his father's business partners noted that the boy was quite good at it. 3 months ago, Mrs. Wallace remarried and went to Paris with her new husband. She was very fond of the Parisian mansion with the attic and its sale. Stephen had all the money, power, connections, and opportunities that a mere mortal could only dream of. The only thing missing was love. Women for pleasure didn't count. By the time he was 26, Wallace Jr. had no family. "What are my years?" he joked, though his mood was often cloudy. But when he remembered his lush brown curls and short figure, he was immediately enlightened. Adriana, 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 he thought with a sigh. And why couldn't I defend my love? Why? Why? Because I was only 16. What could I do? Yes, I could have found her later. His thoughts were confused, as they always were when Stephen thought of Adriana. He was aimlessly clicking buttons on the remote control. And suddenly, at first Wallace thought he was hallucinating. Well, what could he think? With Adriana smiling at him from the screen. In person, Stephen turned up the volume. The queen of his dreams was talking about some new method of teaching retarded children. And when the host of the program said in which city the children's institution was located, Stephen was ready to kiss him. It's decided. As he fell asleep, he thought, tomorrow I will visit that city. Stephen, but we've been preparing for this deal for almost 6 months, exclaimed his deputy. Are you sure that everything will work out without you? Daima, he urged. My late father always said that a real businessman should literally radiate confidence, even if you do not feel it. Yuzik, I trust you, so let's give it our best shot. I know you can do it, instructed the deputy. Stephen left the office and got into his Lexus and drove off to meet his destiny. Finding a children's center for children with disabilities was not difficult. Half the job is done, he thought contentedly. Before going to the neighboring town, Stephen made some inquiries about Adriana. He found out that his tutor was single and raising her son Christopher alone. Christopher, Wallace repeated quietly, no longer doubting for a second that Adriana was raising his son. Christopher Wallace. There was a bouquet of scarlet roses in the car. At first, Stephen thought about buying a ring, but changed his mind. Flowers were enough, but a ring might scare Adriana away. The young businessman was sitting in his SUV in the parking lot in front of the children's center and leisurely held out his coffee. Suddenly, he saw her. Adriana was dressed in a light flowing gown of soft coral color, spectacularly appreciating her brown hair slightly burned out in the July sun. The demeanor of the century buns. The young woman approached the white Toyota and opened her purse, which apparently contained the car keys. Crazy, Stephen thought. She hadn't changed at all. He picked up the flowers and walked toward Adriana. Good afternoon, Stephen said with a warm smile. Good afternoon. Stunned, Adriana repeated. Stephen, how did you end up here? Adriana, let's not talk about you, Wallace said affectionately, yet firmly, holding out the roses to her. It's inappropriate in our situation. If you haven't already realized, we're supposed to be together. Well, I'm willing to wait as long as it takes. I realize I should have done it much sooner, but better late than never, isn't it? Stephen, I also want to be involved in our son's life. And don't tell me that's not my son. Tears came to Adriana's eyes. She only now realized that all these years she had been suppressing her love for Stephen. First, because he was an underage boy and she was an educator. And then because John had made it clear to Adriana that he did not accept her as Stephen's daughter-in-law. Adriana realized how much she enjoyed saying that name. Yes, but how would Wallace Sr. feel about it? What's a sister-in-law? He asked with such tenderness that Adriana's heart sank. What about John? My father died 2 years ago. Cancer. I'm sorry. Life goes on, Stephen answered quietly. And I want to live it with you. By the way, Antashka is home now. Adriana smiled. Great. So, let's go meet our son. I'm all for it. When Stephen first came to meet his son, he felt his soul filled with something warm, light, and very, very pure. It was love. Daddy, where have you been so long? Asked the boy. I just got lost on the way to happiness, answered Stephen with a smile, and his eyes sparkled. Adriana, watching them, did not think to be ashamed of her tears, because they were tears of happiness. Stephen and Adriana got married 3 months later. In the wedding dress, the bride resembled a young girl. And no wonder, because true love has no age, and a person is young as long as he loves and is loved.